Jim, what is that in the background for Dennis? There's the gathering plate.
Yeah, that's from the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games in like 1995, I think, or 96. I was playing in a bagpipe band and from Greenville, actually. And I won first place in the grade 4 march. Solo playing. I played bagpipes. I hadn't played in a long time, but I'm a full-time musician now.
With or without a kilt?
Oh, I had my kilt on.
Okay.
And behind that, actually, on the wall is a sitar from Madras, India. When I was in the Navy, I went to Madras, and I always wanted a sitar after seeing Ravi Shankar and the Beatles and all. So I actually left the ship when I had some time off, and I went and I got in a taxi and got a guy to explain to him in English to take me to a music store. And he did, and I walked in, I bought the sitar and brought it back and actually it stayed beside me for months in my rack on my bed and on the ship. I just put it right there. I was scared to store it anywhere. I thought it might get damaged. So I slept beside it for about 3 months to get it back to the States.
I was surprised you would even be allowed back on the ship with an item like that.
Well, it was...
Ask for forgiveness, not permission.
I kind of snuck it on board, if you really want to know the truth. But it was in a big bag, kind of decorative bag thing. They didn't even have a case for it. And it's very, it's a gourd, so you can break it real easily. So I was real careful. But I think it's a cool piece. Yeah, thank you.
Now, we do...
Are we rolling?
Yeah, we're rolling. And, we're just giving some context to some of the background literally behind Dennis, our guest here with us. So for those that don't know our guest just by looking at him, his name is Dennis Hayes, really a legend, a pioneer, not just here in Atlanta, but within the technology industry. Anyone that's familiar with the early days of the early computer industry, personal computer industry, will know a company called Hayes Microcomputer Products that invented and really, again, pioneered the modem and really internet communications on those first early computers. So, Dennis, thank you for joining us, and love to talk more about some of your background, what you've done, and then, of course, some of your current initiatives that I'm happy enough to be a part of as well. So, again, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, let me say that the Hayes Microcomputer Products created the PC modem market segment in the PC industry. There were modems before that, but generally they were used mostly for lease line connections, where you would connect a remote office to a data center, or they were what were called acoustic couplers, where you would take the handset of the telephone, put it into the cups on an acoustic coupler, and be lucky if you get 300 bits per second transmission, because any background noise would interfere with the communication. But it was a way of connecting to the telephone line before the Part 68 was passed at the FCC, which allowed for the little modular connector you use today to connect into a wired phone line, if you can find one anywhere anymore. It seems like almost everyone has gone to smartphones.
Yep.
And it's hard to find a regular telephone set connected to a wire that goes to the central office. That's pretty much a technology of the past. But in the early 80s, as the PC industry was getting started, that was the way that people communicated, was with telephone lines. And that was before smart modems were available to send data, before smartphones were available to make phone calls. And we used the available technology to enable the early PC users to connect to information systems or transfer files between computers. Or the big thing at the time was the bulletin board systems. The bulletin board systems were sort of a precursor to the internet. The internet protocol and the internet architecture was created by DARPA for connecting mostly government research computers and with academic research computers. And turned out that protocol, packet switching network, was a good solution for scaling out to the general public. And that's where we got the internet.
And now, so I think you touched on a great point that you didn't even you don't consider yourself the inventor of the PC modem as, Wikipedia does, right?
No. Well, there's a distinction is between the PC modem and the modem.
Okay.
Western Electric, Bell Labs invented the modem. We invented the category of the PC modem, which is a product category that did not exist before we started making them. There were 2 or 3 early competitors, and we defined a new product category, a new market segment, as the PC industry got started. We started with the Apple II. Well, actually, we started with the S100 bus in 1978, 77, 78. The S100 bus had a circuit board that could plug into a computer bus that had a 100-pin connector, so they called it the S100 for standard 100-pin connector. And there were several computers at the time. The first was the Altair by MITS, M-I-T-S. They were actually got started in Georgia. And then the MSI came along and was a little bit more robust chassis for holding the boards. And then there was sort of an explosion of several dozen different companies that made S100 bus compatible computers. And so our first product at Hayes was the we call it the 80-103A data access adapter for the S100 bus. And it had a serial port with a modem built in. You plugged it into the computer bus, and then software could talk to it through what's called a UART, a Universal Asynchronous Receiver Transmitter chip. And that was a chip that turned serial data into characters that can be read by the computer bus. And it took characters out of the memory into the computer bus into the UART chip and turned the parallel bit output of the computer bus into serial data that could be transmitted through the modem. And the UART also had the functionality of adding start bits and stop bits to make it asynchronous communications, consistent with the ASCII standard, ASCII. What was that? American Standard for Communications Information Interchange or something like that.
Yeah, American Standard Code for Information Interchange.
Yep, it's pretty close.
I was showing Jim, I pulled up a picture of the 80-103A and showed him, and then he did one of those gestures, like it going right over his head. And it's just amazing how much you're able to recall in such technical detail.
Well, we built those. We started out, you could get it one of 2 ways. You could either get a bare circuit board with instructions how to build it yourself. It was a technology at the time based on what's called through-hole technology on the circuit board. So all the components would stick through the circuit board. The leads on the components would stick through holes on the circuit board. And an individual that was relatively skilled with soldering could solder the parts in and assemble it themselves. Pretty soon that went away because most customers would prefer to buy it assembled and tested and know that it was going to work when they plugged it in, and not have the hassle of going to find the parts. But all the parts were off-the-shelf standard components, except that the filters on the next generation, which was the Micromodem 100, were hybrid filters that we had to supply, but by then very few people wanted to build it themselves. The hybrid filters had a substrate with a number of components mounted on the substrate, and it was a module that connected into the circuit board. So the second product that we did after the 80-103 was the the Micro Modem 2 for the Apple II. And if you remember the Apple II, I think it had 8 slots across the back of the chassis. Basically, the Apple II was pretty flat and had a nice molded chassis that the motherboard laid in, and across the back of the motherboard there were 8 connectors you could plug devices into. Well, one of the features there was you could put read-only memory or ROM memory on the circuit board you plugged in, and then you could direct the computer, the Apple II, to use the code on that plugged-in board to run that device. So when we first delivered the Micro Modem 2, we used a Control-D for dial so that it would activate the dial software on this board. And like a month later, Apple came out with a disk drive and used the Control-D for the disk. And so we had our first change so we changed it to Control-Q to get away from things Apple would be likely use. So the Control-Q was used to dial the modem on the Micro Modem 2. And the other thing we did when we introduced the Micro Modem 2 was we developed what we called the microcoupler, which was a small box that was on an umbilical cord outside the computer that allowed you to connect directly into the phone line. That was one of the earliest data connections into the phone line under Part 68 of the FCC regulations. Some years earlier, there had been a big lawsuit. The Bell system was a closed network. You had to get equipment from them. You had to get your phone from them. You had to get your modem from them. And in order to open that up, actually Carter Phone brought a lawsuit against the Bell system, and they won. And the result was the court required the FCC to create a method that allowed companies to make equipment that could attach to the phone line. So the result of that was what was called Part 68, which defined the modular connector and the specifications for the testing you needed to do. And each company was required to do the testing and submit the results to the FCC in order to get approval to connect. Now, when we did that the first time, we called up the FCC and said, well, what are the rules for doing the testing? And they said, well, you've got the test specs. There are no more specifications. That's it. You have to do the work and turn in your report. And I looked around at our guys and said, okay, treat it like we were doing a physics lab at Georgia Tech,
right,
or a chemistry lab at Georgia Tech. Describe the configuration. Say what the test is. Describe the configuration you use to do the test. Show your data. Show your calculation, and show your conclusion. And so we did that. And shortly after we turned it in, they called us and said, can we show this to other people because nobody's known how to do it?
Wow.
And we said, well, we figured it was public information since we're giving it to the FCC. So, no problem. We don't consider it copyright because we're responding to the requirements of the regulatory environment to show that we've tested it properly. And of course, we wanted anybody else who did it to not damage the phone network. So that actually worked pretty well.
So, if you don't mind me going back a little bit, there's an interview with you at the Computer Museum of History here in Roswell.
Oh, yeah.
And you were interviewed and mentioned that when you came out with the Micro Modem 2 for the Apple II, that you got a call from Steve Jobs asking about the product that you were making for their Apple II. What can you share about the call and the time surrounding this event, if anything sticks out?
Well, I could tell you all about it. We made the first batch of production units and had those ready to sell, and we put together a information kit. And I think at that time we had identified there were probably about 10 or 12 computer stores across the country. Turned out one of those computer stores was owned by Steve Wozniak's brother somewhere in Silicon Valley. I think probably San Jose. And what we did was mailed those out to the stores and asked if they wanted to buy some to sell to their customers. And we offered them a retail discount off of the suggested retail price. And all those got sold in a week or two and got shipped out. And then I got a call from Steve Jobs. And first of all, he's like, I hear you're building a product for the Apple. You can't use our brand. You can't say anything about Apple. I said, wait a minute, Steve, have you not heard of the O-Cedar mop case? And he's like, what's that? I said, that's the court case that says that if I make a mop head for your mop, I can tell people that it's for your brand of mop. So if I make a modem for your computer, I can tell people it's for your brand of computer. Same kind of situation, already settled in court. Oh, well, is his response. We want to see what you're doing, so come out here tomorrow. And I'm like, well,
across the country. Yeah.
I just shipped the last of the product we built. We're going to be building another batch in a couple of weeks. I can come out when the next batch is ready and bring a couple of product and show you. And so that was okay, and we settled on a date that I would come. In the meantime, if you took two modems and tried to connect them back to back, they really weren't made to work that way. They were made to connect to the phone line. So if we were going to show it on a desktop or a countertop in Cupertino, we needed a way of having two Apples connect through the modems back to back. So Dell Hetherington, who did the circuit design for all the first modems, came up with a little box that we called the Phony company, and it had two RJ11 female connectors on it. So you could plug the modem into it on one side and the modem of another computer into the other side. And you could dial one modem. It would take the circuitry off hook inside the Phony company, and it would generate a ringtone to the other modem. That modem would sense the ringtone and answer in the proper mode, so the two modems could speak to each other over the phone line. And that's what we took with us to Cupertino. And when we got into their offices, they took us to a conference room that had a counter over on one side of the room in front of a window. And they had two, we told them ahead of time we'd like to have two Apple IIs set up there that we could put the modems in, and we could show them how it worked. So we set that up with one modem in each Apple II, the Phony company connecting them onto each other, and we stood there all day as people came through, maybe two or three at a time, maybe one at a time, and say, I heard about what y'all are doing, show me what you got. So we were showing people all day how it connected one computer to the other. The most interesting part of the day, it turned out that Steve was gone that day, so I didn't get to see him that day. But Mike Markkula, who had been with the company a short while, came from one of the semiconductor companies and had a good background in marketing and business development, came to talk to me. He said, let's go somewhere and sit down for a minute. So we went and spent about 30 to 45 minutes where he was grilling me, how can you use this for phone phreaking? Is there any way to cheat? And of course, we had built it to the Part 68 specification, which included the billing delay and things of that nature, so that you couldn't use it to cheat or it wouldn't generate the phone phreak tones. So it was safe for people to use and not get in trouble stealing long distance.
And Jim, are you familiar with this concept of phreaking?
No, yeah. I heard him say phreaking. I was like, did he just say phreaking?
So, and Dennis, correct me.
Phone phreaking is it doesn't work anymore. But at those times over the wired phone lines, there were certain tones you could send and make free long distance calls and basically steal long distance service from the phone company.
And the idea was you would bypass the operator, or was it already like an automated operator system at that point?
It was long. You had long distance dialing already. You had 10-digit long distance dialing already. This was like 1978, 79 kind of time frame. So you'd had long distance dialing for a long time.
Okay.
Probably 20, 30 years. So it wasn't anything new to do long distance dialing. But it was a fairly primitive system at the time because it was all controlled. All the equipment was controlled by the telephone company. So you were not allowed to attach anything to the phone line that didn't come from Western Electric and wasn't installed by their installers. Well, if you were a phone phreak, you could generate your own equipment, figure out how to generate those tones, and steal long distance. And a lot of people did that and got in big trouble. And there were a lot of stories written about it in the press and sort of the pseudo-technical press. And
I know that was a big part of Apple's early history. That Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs supposedly were big into phone phreaking at the time, and they would sell some of those before early Apple One computers.
My understanding was Steve Wozniak had some, at least knowledge of how to do that.
I heard that they called the Vatican.
I don't know.
Well, I might be confused with
something. No, I think I've heard something like that. Yeah, and that they called someone that they didn't think they would get a hold of, and there they were talking to someone at the Vatican or something along those lines.
I don't know. It could easily have happened. If you knew the number, you could call anybody.
I'm curious, like from your perspective, Mike Markkula is not someone that's talked about a lot from the early history of Apple, at least nowadays. You get a lot of people, I feel like, well, it was really Steve Wozniak, he brought all the technical know-how, or you get, of course, a lot of people that it was really Steve Jobs. But one thing that I heard in the last half decade or decade or so, Steve Wozniak was talking at a conference that he thinks more so than either of the Steves, that Mike Markkula was really the driving force that made Apple or allowed Apple to grow into the company that we know it today. I think that's true. And if there's a recording, there's a living history done by Mike on the, I think the Computer History Museum in San Jose has a recording that he did that tells about his involvement with Apple in the early days. And I think it's clear from that he played a major role. Creating the whole concept of a value-driven organization was a key part of that. Yeah, I think from my understanding, it's like obviously, Steve Wozniak had some great technical capabilities. Steve Jobs, say about what you will about how brash, he was, stated to be, especially earlier on, that he did have some, marketing know-how, right? He did have, while he wasn't technical really himself, much like I think you would consider yourself, like obviously technical being involved in the technology businesses, but as I've heard, you've also talked about what's more important is the marketing, right? And it's really a blending of the two. It's not one without the other.
Well, Steve Jobs was the lead entrepreneur.
Right.
Okay, so he was. Let's figure out how to do this. Let's do something that changes the world. Was really what he seemed to be all about, But there's another marketing person that's very important to the early days of Apple, and that was Regis McKenna. Regis McKenna has one book that I'm aware of called The Regis Touch, and he was basically a PR and marketing guru. I managed to hire him a few years later on, probably in the 1990s. And he was one of the gods of the industry in Silicon Valley. One of the very famous people that was credited for making Apple really famous. And his approach to public relations and marketing is still very useful today, although the media part of the environment has totally changed today. Media is so different. In the 1970s and 1980s, and even up into the 1990s, you were talking about print publications, starting with Byte Magazine, Interface Age, Kilobaud Magazine, and before too long, PC Magazine, PC World, CRN, Computer Reseller News for the industry. So you had a handful of publications that were the vehicle, were the media that everybody read. It was like the early days of television. You had 3 channels, right?
Right.
So during the early days of the PC market, you had 3 and then 5 or 6 publications that were the information channel to reach the people that were interested in the topic. Nowadays, to the extent they still exist, they're all online publications, like PC Magazine is an online publication. And Ziff Davis saw the writing on the wall that was going to transition, and Ziff Davis sold the business probably in the late 90s, if I recall, and cashed out of the publishing business just as that transition was starting to ramp up.
And now, Jim, this is more your speed.
Now you're talking my territory.
Jim retired from the media business and had a illustrious sales career working with a company based out of Norcross, right? Or not quite Norcross, but
out of Atlanta.
Yeah. Collinson Media Company?
It was called originally Collinson and Company. It was a publisher's rep firm selling advertising for publishers.
Right.
And then we started our own publications, and it became called Collinson Publishing. And then we got into the events industry as well, so it became media and events. But one of the guys in our company left and went to work for Ziff Davis. Right. And that was right in that time frame before they made all. And he lasted a year and a half. And he said it was terrible because of the transition. They were moving away from print advertising, and it was all going online. And so when you said like PC Magazine exists online, that's the story of my life, because here we have all these magazines. We were repping some really big brands, Reader's Digest, People, Parade Magazine, some really big brands.
Right.
And so many of them are now, USA Today used to be the newspaper that everybody read in hotels when you're traveling. it's now like a little tabloid. It's so much smaller. So it's all gone online. And I just, for my side, I got out of the industry in the nick of time. I retired and left the publishing side because I'm not a technical person like you guys are. So anyway.
Well, the internet has impacted quite a few industries in similar ways. Certainly publication is a huge impact.
The music industry.
Music, big transition. The fact, though, that you can create an independent music label, promote it on the internet, and break out with a major band is possible. It creates a new level of freedom, but it also creates a different. It requires different skills to be successful over what it took when you back in the 1980s and 1990s. I had a little experience working with rock and roll bands.
Really? I would be really interested for you to segue into that if you'd like to.
Well, I can go to that, and we can come back and talk about other parts of the modem business a little later, because there are some things that I'd like to get back to the smart modem, but let's do that for a minute.
Yeah, just for a few minutes, break away. So tell me about that. I'm really curious about that.
In 1999, I guess sort of on a whim, I worked with a partner that had some experience running a bar. And we found a location on Buford Highway that years ago had been a Danvers restaurant, and more recently had been just a local bar. And we leased.
Brian, I'm sorry, Brian. Front. They're coming to the front. Sorry.
No problem.
I don't know who this is.
Those are some interns that work with us. So,
okay.
Sorry for the lack of a heads up there.
That's
I want to apologize for that obnoxious doorbell ring. I got to change that chime.
Well, hello.
We got interrupted.
That's
no
okay.
Worries. No worries.
That's okay. So, okay.
Hey guys, just don't sit at that table. Either pull up the chairs aside from Brian, or if you guys want to maybe grab chairs from the living room.
Whatever works.
All right. Yeah, sorry, Dennis. Post 1999.
So in 1999, working with a friend who had some bar experience, we opened what we called the Whiskey Rock.
Please don't sit on. I'm sorry. Please don't sit on those chairs. They're decorative. They'll break.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I didn't know you were having extra people.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought one. Anyway.
Okay, so well, in 1999, working with a friend of mine that had some experience managing a bar, we opened the Whiskey Rock on Buford Highway. What at the time I like to call it off of Buckhead, since the Buckhead scene was quite the nightlife at the time with 24-hour clubs and other things that don't exist anymore. But what we did was it was a building that had a capacity of about 200 people, and we could do shows there. So when we got the facility, we rebuilt the stage, made it somewhat larger, and set it up for bands to come in and do their show. Totally changed the sound system, upgraded it significantly. And we would have typical night at the Whiskey Rock, Tuesday through Thursday would be 5 or 6 local bands, and you hope they brought 15 or 20 people that were old enough to have a beer. And but it was fun. We met a lot of local bands, and of course we had to check IDs carefully, make sure everyone was old enough to have a beer, or sell them a Coke instead. And then, but on the weekend, on Friday night and Saturday night, we would try to book better known local bands or someone who's touring that we could get to come in for a show. They might have a show in Atlanta on Friday night, and we'd have them come into the Whiskey Rock on Saturday night. Or they might have a show 100 miles away, and we'd have them come in. But we work with the touring groups to find who can we get to come in inexpensively, and book that a couple weeks ahead of time, and promote it with creative loafing and on the radio, and get a good crowd turnout. So several times we only did that for a year, but I met several bands. And one of the bands I work with, at that time I was going to New York often to work with business concerns, and so I'd take care of my computer-related business during the day, and when I get to the end of the day there, I'd meet the band at their practice space in New York, watch their practice for an hour or two, then we'd go get dinner, and then we'd go out and explore the New York scene, to usually ending up after midnight at one of the after hours places that the music people would hang out in, and got to know several of the writers for Rolling Stone, and several of the A&R people for different labels, many of which don't exist anymore. But with that band, we ended up having a showcase at CBGBs, which, if you know, is one of the famous music venues that's been closed down in New York. But at that time, it was the famous place to get found in the music industry. And we did a showcase one evening. Only had about 20 people there. The band's lawyer, a couple of people like me that were helping the band, and most of the other people were A&R guys from different labels. We ended up, and that band was called Stereo Mud. We ended up getting them signed on Sony's higher level distribution label, and they did 2 albums before they broke up. So that was interesting to learn that the music business is a business, and working with other bands that were at the Whiskey Rock. Part of the message was, if you want to be successful in music, you got to treat it like a business. Get stable in your living condition. Get a day job that'll let you leave at a reasonable time on Friday afternoon, so you can travel to venues to work on Friday and Saturday night. But make sure you're able to pay the rent and
show up to your gig.
Survive while you're writing your music and getting your band started. And that's still true with the entrepreneurs I work with today, is, make sure you've got a stable situation. If you're going to go full-time working on your venture, make sure you've got a way to pay the rent.
Yeah, your parents, right? Great. Works for me.
Well, that's one. Yeah. There's many ways. When I started Hayes, when I started the Modem company, I realized that myself, and so I said, okay, I'm currently paying so much monthly rent. I realized if I went and bought a house, instead of paying $500 or $600 a month of rent, I could be paying $350 a month house payment. So I went and bought a house to stabilize my housing expense, because I knew that if I was paying a mortgage, the price wouldn't go up next year the way it would if I rented an apartment. And so I created a stable situation for living, and having spent years at Georgia Tech and living in an apartment, I knew how to cook and take care of all that stuff. And it was, stabilize the living expense so that you can live really, really inexpensively while you're starting the business, and don't expect to go out and have fancy dinners or do a lot of expensive dating or anything like that, because
no time, no money.
In other words, be realistic
Yep.
in your
situation
analysis.
that you're starting at.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Situation analysis, be realistic.
And realize that if that's what you want, then go get a high paid job,
Right.
and enjoy that until it burns out.
Right.
But if you want to start a company, be the master of your destiny, it requires some sacrifice, but you can manage that so it's not so bad, and look forward to the day when you'll make a lot more money. And work on getting the business up and running. When you make a lot more money, then you'll get tired of those fancy dinners. You'll get tired of being asked to sponsor a table at one fundraiser or another. You'll get tired of the entertaining side of supporting the business at some point. But also going to the trade shows and those type of events was a big benefit, because you could meet a lot of people in a short period of time, and get a lot of feedback from people if you were willing to ask them open-ended questions and listen to what they had to say.
Now, what do you think about the remarks that our last guest that we had, Sig Mosley, who when I talked with him prior to coming in and doing the podcast with us, ran into him at the state capitol, and talked about some of the work that we're doing together through ATVL, and he mentioned that, Dennis and I go way back. So I would love to hear some thoughts there, but more specifically, he echoed some comments that in another tribute video for you online, John Yates made a comment about how not many people in Atlanta are willing to take risk like the one you were perceived to take in starting Hayes Microcomputer products. Do you think this is true, or do you think it was true, still is true, or do you look at it differently? Because that's something that we heard both from Sig and John, and that's something that I think we've talked about a little offline, but love to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, if you go back in time to like the 1970s and 1980s, that was really a formative period for technology in Georgia. And, Scientific Atlanta was here, and MSA, which was a software, the large mainframe software company for big company software. And you had your big companies like IBM and AT&T and stuff like that. Well, in that environment, starting a new business was very risky, because if you went to the bank, they had no idea what you were doing. And if you tried to raise money, there were very few venture capitalists in the Atlanta area in those days. Actually, we identified that as a shortage. The governor, I'm not sure exactly what year it was, but somewhere in the late 70s, I think, Governor Busby, I guess at the end of Governor Busby's term, he created a Science and Technology Commission for a period of time, and we worked on basically teaching the state government how to develop new science and technology-based business. And some of the sketches I made explaining things to people during those meetings ended up in the report for the governor. The idea of something getting invented at the university and then getting spun out into a company is a pretty difficult process. Then taking something in a company and scaling it up to be a major market player is another very difficult process. So there's a lot of businesses that you think would do well that die along that path. It's a road with a lot of bodies all along of the ideas that looked good at the time that didn't make it. So what a lot of us, a lot of my friends and people I know that help startup companies, what we try to do is help the founders understand what it takes to be successful, to get to the point where they can scale their business successfully and not be one of those that wish we had been able to do a better job. If we get 10% of the startups to reach maturity, then that would be a wonderful outcome. And it's unfortunate when they fail, but it's reality.
And that's what John Yates was touching on, that you are just so unique and are so unique here in Atlanta compared to where a lot of people, or not even a lot of people, but more people were taking those similar sorts of risks to start companies out in Silicon Valley, but you were kind of on an island in your own here in Atlanta. And to some degree, that still feels like the tech environment to some degree.
Well, some of the companies that are here today came because we were here. I've had founders of companies that moved from California to Georgia approach me at public events and say, thank you for starting your company in Georgia. When we learned how good it was to do business here, we decided to move from California and base our business in Atlanta. And that was rewarding. But I think one of the differences is that a lot of the investors, and I know SIG is this way, and there are quite a few of the venture capital funds in the Atlanta area that not only prefer to invest in a software company, but will not invest in a company that has hardware. Now, in my way of thinking, there's software companies that just do software, and that's usually become a SaaS or software as a service type of business. Then there's companies like Hayes was, where most of our technology was software, but we delivered it in a hardware enclosure with the specific hardware needed to implement a modem. And so while we did a lot of software, we put it in a hardware wrapper. Then there's other companies, like one that I work with today that's in the ATDC at Georgia Tech, RIF Robotics. They're taking a off-the-shelf robot arm. They've modified the fingers with some inventions to make improved fingers on the robot. And they are processing the medical devices that are used in surgeries, and they're putting together the surgical trays in a sterile environment and using the robot to pick up those instruments, identify that it's the correct instrument, look to see if it's clean, and then place it in the surgical tray in the right position so it'll be where the doctors need it once it's in the operating room. And that's a big opportunity because the robot helps eliminate mistakes. It also reduces the exposure of the employees to getting nicked or stabbed or cut with the medical instruments that are used to, making, there's scissors and knives and scalpels and whatever you call them. But a lot of them have sharp edges where you can get hurt. So it eliminates the employee accidents and eliminates the mistakes that often get made. And they're demonstrating that in the lab at this point and doing proof of concept demonstrations. But that's mostly software, but it's supported by the hardware of the robot and the feeding mechanisms that feed the robot. So for investors in Atlanta, that's still scary to them because they're afraid of that hardware inventory. Part of the risk is if you buy all these hardware components and intend to assemble them and sell it to your customer, what happens if the company goes out of business and you get stuck with all that hardware? That you lose that money, or you get pennies on the dollar for scrap value. Whereas if it's a software company, you don't have any hardware inventory to take a loss on. And I think that's a big piece of what they think about when they look at the investment scenario.
Now, again, obviously, if it's like there's still plenty of money in the bank to pay back investors, maybe at least to cover their initial investment. But to me, with a hardware business, typically it would be better that you have some assets that you can sell off after the fact, right? That you can recoup some of that money. But again, I guess with the true VC model, it's either you want the 100x, 1000x, or might as well be 0x, right?
Well, and looking for the unicorn in software has been the appeal to the investors in the Atlanta area. I think with that, over the last 40 years, we've missed out and gotten behind on things like robotics, on other hardware-oriented or other industries, or like chemistry-based industries. And up in South Carolina, we see more because there's the current state of textile industry is a lot of chemical
processing or
process and chemical products that are used in the textile industry. A lot of those have transitioned away from just weaving fabric, which is now mostly done offshore, but where they've specialized in the high-tech elements of the textile industry where they can still make a good profit.
Wow.
And so each industry goes through different phases. But I wish that President Trump had been there in 1985 to do what he's doing with tariffs today, because we might have still have a Hayes microcomputer products today. One of the things we learned in the mid-1990s is that our system in America was set up to make it very difficult for us to do the bulk of our manufacturing in the U.S. An example would be in 1996, I was able to buy a capacitor that we used thousands of in our product for a certain price in the U.S. If I went to Hong Kong and bought it, I could get it for like 15% less. But if I went to Shenzhen, China and bought it, I could get it for 25% less. And it was the same U.S. manufacturer component.
Yep.
We figured out the difference was the tax system of the countries.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ended up buying components. Instead of buying them in Georgia, we ended up buying components in China and shipping them back to Georgia to save money on the component cost for a while before we ramped up manufacturing in Shenzhen, where we ultimately ended up doing our high volume manufacturing.
And I think that's the key there. As much as especially from the investor space, we're behind here in Atlanta, but even just the United States, what you're saying with the tariffs, as much as it has driven up the price of some consumer goods here in the short term, I really look at it as a Band-Aid that needs to be ripped off, right? We outsourced all of our manufacturing for far too long, and we really built our country for the last few decades on the back of Chinese slave labor. And
we made a situation where a U.S. manufacturer had a 25% cost, not price, cost disadvantage against producing the same product overseas. And that was our system created that cost disadvantage. And it was hard to get, when Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House,
yep.
I tried to get his attention to look at it. about the time he was having other difficulties, and the Clinton administration had no interest in talking about it, and it was, it was difficult to get any political interest on that side of things.
Are you talking specifically NAFTA?
No.
Or is
This is pre-NAFTA.
This is pre-NAFTA.
No, this was just the way taxes and tariffs were set up, and the competitive environment we had, manufacturing in the U.S. versus manufacturing offshore. We had no import duties, so we could manufacture offshore and bring things in for free. Right? That was your free trade misconcept. Okay? Free trade in one direction is not fair. Free trade needs to work in both directions in order to be fair.
And that's, I think, the common misconception is like that we all want free trade, but it's great if we are operating within those free trade regulations within our own borders. But if that's not the global standard, and in the same way that we subsidize, some of our agriculture, like corn, for example, right? You got Japan back in the 80s, they were subsidizing memory to compete in the global market. China's been just subsidizing the chips and all the technology that goes into our consumer products. And we've let that happen. And, I mentioned that we decided to build up the middle class of China at the expense of building up our own middle class, just so we can have cheaper goods. And it looks better on paper, but...
Yeah, and I think that goes back to Jimmy Carter's administration and some of the, what I would call wrong thinking coming out of the Trilateral Commission and some of those groups that he looked to as think tanks, that
I really think it goes
had different results than it's sort of like it had the result they intended, but then the side effect was damaging to our prosperity.
That's where I think even kind of just post World War II, I mean, we've been kind of reliant on all the wealth that was created from our industrial base that, went from ramping up to create military equipment to now we have the boom over in like Silicon Valley that started up really in the 50s. And you had like housewives that were doing advanced technical manufacturing. And of course you go even earlier, another, 50 years, and we're just coming out of our industrialization period. And I'm not trying to say that we want like kids back in factories by...
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why was Silicon Valley in California? Don't know.
I do not know. I could tell you like what I've heard from, but I don't know.
William Shockley's mother lived in Silicon Valley.
And William Shockley, Fairchild Semiconductor, or?
William Shockley was one of the three inventors of the transistor at Bell Labs in New Jersey. Okay. He moved, I think, to San Jose area and started a business doing transistors to be near his elderly mother so that he could take care of her. He was a great technical mind and a mediocre business manager. His skill in working with intelligent technical people wasn't very good. And the whole future of Silicon Valley resulted from him moving there to be close to his mother, hiring a bunch of engineers, eventually over time making them so upset they decided to leave and start another business.
And that became Fairchild Semiconductor.
Fairchild Semiconductor was a spin-out, right? Yeah. And then the same thing happened again when people from Fairchild went to create Intel and a few others.
Yeah, it's amazing that how all that history is interconnected. But it really came like, again, what I was getting at with after we industrialized and realized we don't want all of our children working in these horrendous factory conditions. We don't want, all of our housewives working there either. And we decided essentially we don't want slave labor or very close to slave labor within our own borders anymore. So we found China to take on and become our slaves. And this is controversial, but every great society that has ever been built, or any great civilization, has been built on the back of slavery. And I think now we're in a position, we're trying to figure out who our slaves are going to be. And obviously we don't want our own people, becoming the quote unquote slaves. So it's either, are we going to pick up the pace to become leaders in robotics and robotics manufacturing, or are we going to have to find another China and continue to kick the can down the road and, have to rip off the Band-Aid in another 40, 60, 80 years?
Well, the transition over the last 40 years that's still moving forward is towards advanced manufacturing, automation. And, when we talk about robotics, a lot of times we think in terms of, C-3PO or
R2-D2.
Well, R2-D2 is a less sophisticated form, but not all your robots are going to be able to talk and walk around and
grab objects and
replace what a human does. But it's a big but, because when we automate, we take the labor out of the production and replace it with machine automation that is we take the repetitive, boring slave labor element out of it and replace it with automation. That's not necessarily a general purpose robot.
Right.
That in the 1990s, we took the circuit board assembly operation and we looked all over the world for who had the best manufacturing machinery for us to build that in Georgia. And we found that Panasonic out of Osaka, Japan, had the best surface mount equipment for creating a continuous production line, so that we'd start with an empty board on one end of the line. It would go through several different machines. It'd go through a machine that put capacitors on, go through a machine that put resistors on, it'd go through a machine that mounted integrated circuits, and several, whatever the different components were. And by the time it came out of the end of the line where no one had touched it, it would get to the station where a robot would pick it up, put it on a tester, test to make sure everything was accurate, and either put it on the good line to go to get packed or on the bad line to get repaired. And nobody touched it from one end to the other. Now, there were people all up and down, there were people all up and down that line who were running the machines, loading the components in the machines, running the machines, maintaining the machines. So it's not like we got rid of all the people, it's just we changed the nature of their job. And in doing so, we also increased the output capacity significantly through that automation.
Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway. Oftentimes it's, computers are going to take our jobs. Robots are going to take our jobs, and we see that, yes, certain jobs go away, but new jobs pop up. And I think they're more often than not, if people really thought about what they want to do in life, it opens up more jobs closer to what they want to do to, pursue their creative pursuits, right?
Well, the robotics companies that I'm currently working with think about it more as complementing your job instead of replacing your job.
Right.
We want to take the dangerous part, the repetitive part, the boring part. We want to let the machine do that. And if you're an intelligent person, then your job is to interact with the machine and take care of the exceptions when they occur and do the things the machine's not good at doing. Now, gradually over time, the machine will get better at doing more and more things, but I don't imagine ever having a lights-out factory where there's nobody there,
right,
and the machines are tending the machines.
That would be like an accounting firm, just all the computers are doing all the accounting without any human using the computer and the accounting software. And to me, right?
Well,
or video editing, right?
And if I'm a customer, I don't want to talk to an AI engine
Right.
to tell me about my taxes. I want to talk to a real person who knows how the taxes work, so they can help me plan what I should be doing next year.
Is that a human thing, though? Do you feel as time goes on and humans become more and more comfortable, especially with AI, will there be a time when humans will be interacting with AI and not a human?
We do it all the time already.
But will it become more and more dominant?
Well, as long
Short of
as
cataclysmic events happening, I mean, yeah.
I guess what I'm asking is do you see the human element diminishing with further increased advances with technology, especially with AI coming in?
the AI needs to continue to get quite a bit better, but eventually it can replace a lot of the mundane, but it's not really good at the strategy part yet. But that doesn't mean it won't happen. That doesn't mean that, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, I might be using a free online tax filing service, and it gives me, and I come up with questions that are not part of the basic package, and it gives me a chance to spend $50 to talk to the expert, and the expert is an AI engine that I talk to for 30 minutes to plan my strategy for next year. That's feasible. We're at the stage where AI is actually breaking into civilization the way that computers broke into civilization in the 1980s and 1990s. There were plenty of computers around before that, but they were very expensive, and they were used in business or government where they had a need for managing a lot of data and had the money to pay for it.
Wow, that sounds like the drone industry that we're working in right now. Huh.
I know, and you're working to
have that same effect in the drone industry that some of the largest computer companies have.
Figure out how to be one of the forcing functions for that type of transition in the drone industry. Yeah, and that's an admirable objective, but that's also difficult to predict at how that's going to develop. So your flexibility, your ability to pivot as you learn what's going to work in that industry continue to be important.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a quick question? Have you ever heard of the book Exponential Organizations?
No.
Okay. That was the question.
Okay. Could we take a break?
Absolutely.
I wish I had read it. My father he's passed, but he was a retired nuclear guy. He worked for Duke Energy for close to 40 years.
Okay.
He was an executive. He ran the Catawba Nuclear Station in York County.
Okay, I've got a friend that was a nuclear chemist at that fact.
Interesting. Our family moved from Pickens, South Carolina, where he worked at the Oconee Nuclear Station.
Oh, okay.
And then my dad became the general manager of Catawba, and my family moved to Rock Hill. And he saw the plant when it was being built, and he got it online and then managed it for about another 20 years before he retired.
Oh, cool.
But he read the book and was so impressed. He retired to Clemson, and he went to Clemson, right? So he had all these professor friends of his, engineers, and he read the book, and he was so impressed. He passed it to them, and it made a circuit around. A lot of the professors of his friends read it. I really would think you would really enjoy that book and benefit from it, because it talks about how companies, startups with technology, have surpassed some of the solid brick and mortar companies, the legacy companies.
Oh, yeah.
And they have the exponential organization. With technology, you have a different mindset. You move a lot faster. I think you would really relate well to it.
Well, in technology companies, your revenue per employee is a lot higher than it is in your classical industry. Old textile factory, your revenue per employee might be $50,000 a year. In the 1980s, a software company the revenue per employee was probably $500,000 a year.
Wow.
Yeah, I know some are as high as like 3 million.
Yep.
Nowadays, but that's at the very upper end. I think even Apple's like in the 1 to 1.8 million range.
Per employee?
Per employee.
God, that's crazy, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Apple peaked at they punched through $1 trillion.
They're close to. They got close to 3. I know they're above 2.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember when they broke $1 trillion. It was big news in the financial news. But
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, going back to the books, I would be curious to hear your take on. Obviously, you want to increase productivity almost every chance that you get within business, right? But there's a kind of a balance, if you will. You don't want to be 100% producing because then you're not consuming and you're not figuring out what is the best, product to produce or the best way to produce it if you're just always producing, right? So what do you think that trade-off is for that continual learning outside of the hands-on learning versus, putting yourself in books, watching podcasts, or, taking in content that's not practical from like you actively applying it as you're taking it in?
Okay, that's about 15 different questions tangled up in a knot there. Let me see. Let me break it down a little bit. When you're talking about an organization allocating its resources, you have to understand what market segments you're working in and what it takes to be successful in that market segment. In some markets, you can get away with almost no advertising. For probably, up through World War II, for example, Hershey's never advertised the Hershey bar.
Yep.
Okay, so they didn't need to. Everybody knew it was there. It was the dominant chocolate candy bar, probably up to around World War II. The other industries, you have to spend enough money to get your message to the consumer that you're targeting. But not only that, you have to deliver a message that they're able to understand. You have to, I like to think of tuning your message to where
It's being received.
they'll not only be able to understand it, but they'll be willing to listen to it and hear it.
And ideally rebroadcast it, right? I mean, that's really how you're evangelizing well, if someone can take that message and continue broadcasting it.
Well, that reminds me of one of the things we realized in the modem business, and it's probably still true today. The numbers may be a little different, but one customer with a bad experience would tell 10 people.
Yep.
One customer with a good experience would tell 3 people.
Right.
Okay. So it takes a lot more good experiences for most of the people to think they're going to have a good experience with your brand or with your company. Branding becomes very important. Hayes brand, while we had the modem company, was one of the top brands in the industry. We built that by doing a lot of advertising. We spent 7% of revenue on marketing, which included the advertising. There was no social media at the time to speak of. The internet was just getting started. So most of our advertising was print advertising, public relations, going to trade shows, getting speaking engagements at trade shows and things of that nature. Some of that's still useful today, but it shifted. So a balance between development and production. If you put all your money in production and don't do any development, in a while you won't have any new products that people want to buy.
Right.
So that's a balance. And also in organization planning, one of the things that always surprised me is I was able to lay out the functional departments. So you would have design engineers allocated to work on project A, and then project B 6 months later, and then project C 6 months later. Well, then you come to the test department or the mechanical engineering department, and every time you do an evaluation of, we need to reduce overhead, the accountants would come in and say, well, we don't need any mechanical engineers after 6 months. And it was because no one had taken the effort to figure out what they would be doing to support the design engineers that would be creating new products that needed mechanical design work to go with the electrical and software. And so you can't run it strictly off of accountants' input, and that's where the entrepreneur comes in. How do you find and strike the right balance, and how do you learn over time where that balance needs to be for your business?
Right, balance all of the right inputs to achieve the right output. Very easier said than done. Yeah,
that's right. But you're spending, whatever money you've got that you can spend on the organization and on the tools you have to figure out how to allocate that so that when no one wants to buy the old product anymore, there'll be a new product that they want to buy that replaces the old product.
And now going back to some of those early days for you building Hayes microcomputer products, you rubbed elbows with a lot of people, as we've discussed somewhat already. And recently, in the last half a decade, you were recognized by the CRN Computer History Hall of Fame the same night as Michael Dell. And so you've worked with, and as being yourself, one of the great pioneers of the personal computer industry. Is there any one person that stands out that's had the largest impact from your perspective and turning the industry into what it is today, or maybe the unsung hero that of course, a lot of people know the giants, but.
Well, see, I think one of the misperceptions is the great leap happening suddenly.
Right.
And if we go back and look at some of the interesting books that I think entrepreneurs and science and technology-based businesses should look at, is How Innovation Works. And Why It Flourishes in Freedom is a good book to look at. Most of your innovation comes in small incremental improvements. But over a period of time, you look back and say, wow, it only took 90 years to go from Kitty Hawk to space. All those incremental improvements in between, building on prior knowledge, trying things, having them fail, trying again, figuring out how to make it work, is just part of innovation. Innovation's going to be that way. Then how do you turn invention into innovation? The argument is you invent something, kind of, so what?
Right.
What did anybody do with it? Well, if nobody used it, what good is it? But if you turn it into something where that innovation impacts society, or impacts culture, or impacts civilization, then you've done something that made a change. And unfortunately, almost every technology or tool that you could ever consider or build can be used for good, or it can be used for evil.
Right.
And it's up to people to be able to make the difference.
I have an interesting anecdote, if you don't mind me sharing, that sure. I was up in Chicago delivering a couple of our develop air drones to the city of Chicago and their law enforcement department. Turns out not the greatest customer for us because our drones are development platforms first and foremost, like Dennis was talking about in the early days of the personal computer industry. There were modem products, before, and, even you might be willing to talk about this, that some of like those early kits, they just weren't, the right product for what the customer wanted. They might have thought, oh, this is great. But then once they get to using it and it doesn't work or it breaks over some period of time, it just sits there. Right. And of course, nobody wants that. But, in one of those conversations that I was having with them, there was also some enforcement officers from the FAA. And so, of course, I'm doing my typical evangelization about how we're working to bring drones to the everyday person and talking about how, drones are going to be connected to the internet. And that was like an enabling technology for people to get value out of computers at scale, right? Mm-hmm. I think that same sort of kind of to Dennis's point, like there's already drones, like we've connected our drones to the internet and you've actually witnessed that, hypothetically flying it to that Pizza Hut that one day. But that's of course required for using drones in the way that I'm so passionate about, like you having your own personal assistant drone, sending it to the local Amazon locker, fast food restaurant, retail store. But then there's the FAA enforcement officer. That means that someone could like take a drone, set it up on a roof, and let's say the city of Chicago, they're having a music festival, 3 days later, that drone's just sitting idle for 3 days on that roof. They could be across the country, across the world, controlling that drone over the internet and, doing something to cause harm to those people. Sure. And it's like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that, right? Because that's not what I'm interested in, right? Mm-hmm. But it goes to show that, it isn't the technology that's inherently good, inherently bad, right? But it's up to the person to use it. And that's just one anecdote that I've had, in our, short development period so far that was kind of eye-opening to me, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Similarly, I guess, were there any, of those sorts of experiences that you had where you maybe heard that, modems weren't being used, Hayes modems or products weren't being used in the best way, or you started to realize ways that they could be used that, of course, you weren't like bringing the technology to market for?
Well, actually, there was, in 2001, after the Hayes modem company got wrapped up, I went to New York for a little while and worked with a company that was doing fraud prevention for e-commerce. And the problem was all of a sudden you had platforms where people you don't know could use credit cards that you can't see to buy goods and have them shipped to some place that you don't know if that's where they live or not. And so how do you address fraud in that situation? Well, we worked with one company based in England that had an approach that worked well in England. It turns out in England, most people know their car tag number. So if you say, so if you call me up and said, hey, I'm Jacob, and I said, well, how do I know it's you? I could say, well, hey, Jacob, what's your car tag number? And if I had the database of car tag numbers, I could confirm that it's most likely you.
Wow, yeah.
Okay, because everyone knows it. We took some concepts like that and said, okay, in the United States, if someone calls up the call center and says, I want to purchase this item and here's my credit card number, then how do I know it's you and you didn't steal somebody else's card number? There's all sorts of things I could ask you if I had the database of information to tell me whether that's true or not. For example, I could ask you, what's the cross street at the corner of the address where you live? Okay.
Yeah.
When you leave your home, what's the first street you come to?
2 Rock Court.
Okay, but it's another street. Well, you don't need to say it on the podcast.
I mean, it's public domain. I mean, anyone that's interested enough can find where I live.
Oh, okay. Well, your security department may change that someday.
Yeah, my roommates may have a different thought. And actually, when we started out of the house, I would invite some of our customers to the house, and we did have a close call where, in the litigious world that we lived in, it was like, snowy or whatever before. There's still some ice on our front stoop, and he had made a comment like, "Hey, you better watch out. Someone might sue for that," kind of implying that he would have been that type of guy. And that's when my parents, hey, maybe just keep the house to people working in the company. And then we're in a smaller office now. But one thing I wanted to tie back, unless you had any thoughts that you want to finish up there, was you pioneered and invented the AT command set, right?
Well, let's talk about where the smart modem came from.
Okay, yeah.
That's kind of the overall question. Basically, earlier I told you about the product for the S100 bus, and then the product for the Apple II, and making it connect to the telephone line, directly connect, and so forth. Well, that gave us the ability to dial the phone and all that, and those two boards could be controlled by the software by writing characters and setting bits in registers on those boards, right? So the software talking to the modem in the Apple II, the Micromodem 2, could write characters to the UART and could set bits to change the status of functions on the board. There were registers that had bits in them that could be set at one state or the other. So then we said, okay, well, we've got a product for those two computers. How do we go about making a product that'll work for almost everybody, so we don't have to do a different design product for every computer that anyone ever builds? And that led to the idea of using a standard interface, a serial port. Today you would use the USB port, but at that time it was the RS-232 serial interface was standard on almost all computers and terminals. And it was a 25-pin connector. It had a 15-pin counterpart that you could change the cable to connect to. And it had signals for the data. It had pins for the data and pins for control signals to make the connection between the computer and the modem. It was basically the kind of connector that was used on the original lease line modems that were connecting data centers from point to point. So we said, okay, if we're going to do that,
One of those ports.
how do we get the software to be able to control the function of the modem the way we were able to control it through the parallel interface on the computer bus when we could plug the modem into the slot in the computer? And that's where the AT command set came from. Now, the AT command set is a way of talking to the modem. The processor, there's a reason it's called a smart modem is there's a processor in the modem that can interpret commands and change the state of the modem. One of those commands is a dial command. When you send a dial command, it tells it the phone number is followed by the phone number that the modem can dial to make a connection. So that's your auto dialing function. Now, we needed a way of making it easy to install, or else everybody would be calling us all day, how do I get this to work the first time? And it turns out that in asynchronous communications, the standard allows a lot of flexibility. It allows you to have 7 or 8 data bits in a character. It allows a character to have 1 or 2 stop bits, which are the spacing between characters. It allows you to have a parity to check the character for accuracy or not. And so all that variation needed to be handled. And so the AT command, in addition to having a set of commands that became an international standard, the AT characters at the beginning of the command were used to take a lot of the complexity out of the situation. When you send the AT from your computer to the modem, the processor in the modem looks at the A and the T side by side. It can determine the speed that, the bit per second rate, the speed at which you're sending data. It can determine whether you're sending 7 or 8 data bits, whether or not you have parity, whether the parity is odd or even if you have it, and whether you have 1 or 2 stop bits. And by determining that, the modem can always respond to your character with a character of the same format. And that was done before the whole concept of plug and play came along. But it was a way to automate this, what otherwise would have been a lot of settings you had to set up to get it right for each usage.
So, out of curiosity, if I were to say ATZ, do you know what that command is?
I think that was probably the reset command.
Reboot the radio. And then, so I'm pulling this up actually from the documentation that's for all of the open source drones that we've architected our current drone product around. And so,
well, your smartphone
still uses
the dial function in your smartphone still supports the dial string format.
I did not know that, but
okay, in your Zoom meeting.
Oh yeah.
Where it has the one-tap mobile.
Yep.
That is a Hayes standard AT command set format for dial string with the phone number, comma for delay, transmit the other number, and other characters to end, like the pound sign, to end the dialing. So there's things out of that technology that are still used in different places. But it became a control language that's been adapted into other uses.
Yeah, and it's just, again, obviously there's a lot of similarities between what we're doing in the drone industry and when Dennis was starting in the personal computer industry. But beyond similarities, a lot of, not the exact same technology, but basically all of the computers within most modern drones are really microcomputers, microprocessors. They're not really, full computer boards that you would expect in a laptop or desktop, although there are some drones with those sort of computing capabilities now, but a lot of it's using that exact same technology more or less from the very early personal computer days.
They're what I like to think of as embedded processors and embedded computers. That way you've got, and they might be the size of a postage stamp, or they might be the size of a postcard, or they might be the size of a sheet of paper, depending on the complexity. But a lot of those are available off the shelf for very reasonable prices. You got, some of them are famous, like Raspberry Pi. Some are less famous, like the Tinkerboard from ASUS, that was actually designed to be the controller for a TV set, for an HD TV, to make a smart TV, where you just load the software in there to control the streaming. But if we go back to the modem business, the crazy thing about that was there were lease line standards for how the modem could work at different speeds. There were 300 bit FSK, 2400 bit per second phase shift modulation, and people like to talk about so many baud. Well, a 2400 bit per second modem is still 1200 baud. It just sends 2 bits per baud. And
you're following, right, Jim?
No, not really. But I don't know.
A baud is a change in the state of the transmission line. And so if you want to send 2 bits with one change, you've got to have 4 different states. So that if you go to state 1, it would represent 0, 0. You go to state 2, it represents 0, 1. You go to state 3, it represents 1, 0. You go to state 4, it represents 1, 1. So you get your 4 die bits, or your 4, your die bits out of that signal. Now, when you go up to 56K, it's getting a whole bunch of bits out of each transition because it's still operating at 1200 baud.
Yeah, not that it really matters to really anyone here or the viewing audience, but yeah, the baud rates that our radios use, 56K or 57,600. And
that's not a baud rate, that's a bit rate.
Okay.
The baud rate is much lower because you're getting multiple bits per baud.
So that's interesting.
But that's a popular misstatement.
Okay.
It's like people who talk about a quantum leap. Quantum should be the smallest change in the state of matter, right? And yet people think of quantum leap as being the grand leap.
Yep.
And so it's a misnomer. Mm-hmm. It's been popularized as a misnomer, but
I'm going to have to get on to the ARDU copter developers that say select your baud rate and the options are like 57,600, or if you're plugged in via USB.
Select your bit per second.
Yeah.
It's not, because it's just a misnomer. Yeah. But it's common. Usually academic will complain about it, but it's important to know it if you really understand how things work.
I think it's similar to kind of the marketing term of solid state batteries now, where, what is actually the definition of solid state batteries? There's like a organization that has a definition, but then, all these companies will like use varying degrees of how much of their battery is liquid versus solid, and they'll still market them as solid state, even though, but that happens, everywhere, not just
marketing terminology gets all mixed up and stuff. And a lot of times marketers want to name something because it sounds more interesting, and end up misusing terminology because they're not schooled in the technology.
Like resolutions for computer or TV screens. HD is 720p, full HD is 1080p, but most people call HD 1080p, but that can also be considered 2K, but really most people call it 2K 1440p, which is really 2.5. And so, yeah, the marketing versus the academics and like the common people, you would like to think that there's just these very defined labels. And again, that even goes into politics, right? People that consider themselves Democrats or Republicans, but...
Well, we talked about it earlier about what's a free market.
Right. It doesn't exist.
Well, free market for so long was interpreted that our market's free, so come on in.
Right.
And you want to buy some? We want to sell you something. Oh, we have to pay a big tariff. Well, that's not fair.
Well, and I was talking with Jim on one of our previous episodes specific to the automotive industries, and again, a lot of people get caught up on like the monetary aspects of the tariffs, but it's also a negotiation tactic where if we're trying to sell American automobiles in some of the European Union countries, like Germany in particular, they will have tests that only American cars have to go through, like dropping a bowling ball on the roof as like a safety standard. And it's just to make it more difficult for American companies to sell their cars over there.
Well, in the modem business, we had similar situation in that anything attaching to the telephone line was regulated or forbidden. Okay. When the U.S. market opened up after Part 68 and the Carterphone case, and the Carterphone case caused Part 68 to be created by the FCC, then there was a way to get equipment approved to attach to the phone line. But that did not exist in other countries for a while, and it took time for them to start to open up and follow the U.S. lead. Now, when we went to England, they had a procedure. The British Telecom had a procedure for testing, and it was done by British Telecom. And so you submit your product, they do their test, and you get your approval. It was well-defined and straightforward, and they basically did it by the book. When you went to France, it was kind of like, oh, here's Hayes, the big American company, coming to France. Let's see how good they are. Let's come up with some tests that we've never tested anything to before, right, and see if Hayes can pass it. Similar kind of situation when we went to Germany. When we went to Germany, it was, okay, how can we come up with a test that you will fail, so that we don't have to give you approval this cycle and you'll have to come back and do it again? And we figured out that people would make the difference. You bang your heads against the bureaucracy, doesn't go very far. So at that time, we had an office with some technical staff in the London area. And my instructions were them to go find the test guys in France and Germany, take them out to dinner, buy them a couple of drinks, find out what they're doing, and get them to treat you fairly. And it worked.
It worked. That's
worked.
wild.
Again, every business is a people business at the end of the day.
You still had to meet their standard,
right?
But at least they would let you know how they were testing once they got to know you. When you just throw it over the transom and say, test this and here's the paperwork, the bureaucratic procedure has no personal touch. They're not dealing with a person, so they don't mind being abusive to a procedure.
Right.
But once they know you're a real person and it's your job to get this done, and your boss is going to be upset if you're not able to do it, then it changes the dynamic and you're dealing with people. And it works.
So I guess this would have been right about that time, 90 and 90, was it 90 and 94 that Ross Perot ran, or was it 88, 92? I should really have those. Let me.
It was 90, it was not 80, it was after 88. So
92.
92?
92 is when Clinton got elected, right?
Yes, and I remember hearing that that's still like a sour subject, or it was a sour subject at the Bush household. That
it was when Clinton got elected, because one of the reasons that H.W. did not win a second term is because Ross Perot pulled a lot of votes away from that would have gone to him. And that's how Bill Clinton got into office, was largely because of Ross Perot's involvement as third party. Yeah,
apparently any time like Ross Perot's name was brought up, that was enough to get H.W. Bush, storming off. And
I never will forget the debate that I saw between Ross Perot and Al Gore when they were running. And Ross Perot was against NAFTA. Al Gore was for NAFTA. And I think generally Republicans were in favor of NAFTA. And we've heard what Trump has said about NAFTA being a quote-unquote terrible deal. Terrible.
Well, NAFTA was marketed as a good deal and somewhat misrepresented to the public. If the public had understood how it really worked and what the real impact would be, they may not have been so supportive.
Are you saying that the American public did not understand the Patriot Act either?
Well, I didn't say that. But there's aspects of it that were not understood.
Right. But yeah, if to whatever degree you're willing to talk about it, what has been your influence outside of the technology world? I know like you're pretty outspoken nowadays about your political thoughts, but how did you manage that throughout your business career? Was that something that you're really kind of...
Well, let me give you an example.
Please. Yeah.
I had the opportunity sometime in the early 1980s when Jim Krupe created the International Business Fellows Group. I had the opportunity to be in the first class of the International Business Fellows, which was a training opportunity for executives. And we spent a week in Atlanta getting training about all sorts of aspects of international business. And then we went to London for a week and got to visit Lloyd's and the Financial Times and several other institutions and learn about doing business in Europe and other aspects of international business. Well, one of the people on that trip was Johnny Isaacson. And there were several other executives of different local businesses around Atlanta. And a few years later, I was living in Duluth, and I had a estate with about 7 acres and a nice little pond where we could catch some catfish and brim, and I had a patio deck with a swimming pool where we could bring in tables and seat about 200 people. And so Johnny Isaacson decided to run for governor on the Republican ticket, and he called me up and said, "Hey, I'm running for governor. I'd like to ask for your support." And since I knew him and knew he was level-headed and thought he was a good manager, I said, "Okay, I'll support you. By the way, why don't we plan a barbecue fundraiser at my house in a few weeks after you announce your campaign?" And so we agreed to do that while we're on the phone on the first call. Wow. About 2 weeks later, Zell Miller, who I had known from being around the state capitol, called me and said, "Hey, Dennis, I'm running for governor. I'd like to ask for your support." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Zell, normally I would want to support you because I know you're probably the most conservative Democrat I've ever known. And I know you probably would be a Republican if you hadn't promised your mother you would never be a Republican, since she had a bad experience in her family from the war between the states. And I respect that promise you made, but I've already promised Johnny I would support him." And he said, "Okay." But I said, "Hey, let's get together and have lunch sometime in the next couple of weeks, because even though I'm supporting Johnny, I want you to know what's important to high-tech jobs in Georgia." And I met with both of them, told them about what was important for high-tech jobs in Georgia and why they're an important priority for the state. And both ended up with platforms supporting high-tech industry to create high-tech jobs. So I think traditionally you got to work with both sides.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. When we had Sam Nunn as the state senator, we had the company in Norcross. We had Sam Nunn as state senator, and Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House. So we had two very powerful representatives of Georgia, and we worked with both of them. When we had export issues, for a long time we had to get export licenses to send modems to certain countries, even fairly low speed. Gradually over time, those regulations were relaxed. And there are a number of things that happen at different times. I know if I could just kind of do a random walk here. One time I got a call from a Beltway bandit in Washington, D.C., and they said, we need to get all the 2400 bit per second modems we can for one of our customers. And I said, well, who's the customer? He said, I can't tell you. I'll be able to tell you in 2 or 3 weeks. But I can't tell you right now. But I need to get all the 2400 bit per second modems you have anywhere in the world that you can ship to me right away. And I'm like, well, how about we're phasing those out. I've only got a little bit left. How about 38.8? That's when we were introducing the 38.8 modems. How about some brand new 38.8? They're even faster. They're better product. No. I got to have 2400s. Turned out they were buying up 2400 modems for the military to go to Kuwait and for Desert Storm.
Wow.
And a few weeks later, he called me back and said, your modems are on the way to Desert Storm. I said, what's Desert Storm?
Watch CNN in a couple weeks. Yeah.
No, it was like, watch the news tonight.
Okay, yeah, wow.
Shock and awe.
I had never even heard the term Beltway Bandit before, so I just looked it up for anyone that may not be familiar. It's a term for private companies located in or near D.C. whose major business is to provide consulting services to the federal government, and it was originally a mild insult implying that the companies preyed like bandits on the generosity of the federal government, which we definitely do not see has happened for the last decades and decades and decades on
end. Of course
not. Yeah. And there's certainly no uproar about a certain group going in to see what sort of fraud, waste, and abuse they can find.
Right.
But yeah, I guess when did you start thinking about the politics and the intertwining with business? Was it just when you actually had a problem getting your product to a certain market, or did you just realize that it's kind of a necessary part of business?
In the early 1980s, there was a attempt by the part of several of the bulletin board operators to form an association. The problem they had was they all had different ideas about what they needed to do, and there wasn't any clear leadership. I forgot exactly what the conference was, but there was a conference where a lot of bulletin board operators got together, and there were probably 200 or 300 people at this conference. And I remember when I went in to speak to the conference, they all gave me a standing ovation when I walked in to speak to them, because they all were using our product.
That's awesome.
And during that conference, meeting with some of those bulletin board operators, and also I met Dave McClure. Unfortunately, Dave left us a few years ago, but Dave McClure had been with the Software Association and understood how to organize an association. And he sat in on some of the meetings I had with several of the bulletin board operators, and we decided, okay, let's figure out how to put together what ended up being called the Association of Online Professionals, AOP, Association of Online Professionals. Well, one of the problems that came up shortly after we formed that group, I told Dave, if you can figure out how to raise enough money, we'll pay you to be the director, and I'll be the chairman, and we'll put this association together. And we did. And he came up with enough funding to live on for a while. And Hayes made a contribution to it, but wasn't its sole sponsor. And we started having regular board meetings. Well, first thing you know, several states are trying to put an extra tax on having a modem line. So we said, wait a minute. Let's use the association. So it turned out Florida, the House and Senate in Florida had passed a bill to put like a $10 per month tax on every phone line that had a modem on it.
That's crazy to think about now.
Just
Okay.
potential revenue opportunity, guys. Let's come up. Was that the motivation?
Well, during those days, every government was looking for what else can we tax to generate additional revenue.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was when they came up with. So what did we do? The bill's on the way to the governor, right? The governor's likely to sign it because it's going to be new revenue, and nobody said don't do it.
Yep.
We let our bulletin board operators loose on the governor's office. He called us. His office called us saying, "Call off the horsemen. We'll veto the bill." They got flooded with so much communication so fast that it just all their lines got clogged up. They couldn't communicate. I mean, it was almost like a denial of service attack. But it wasn't meant to be. But it was just letting them know that we oppose that legislation, and so they stopped. Later on, we did other things there, but in the meantime, realizing that was important, I got a group of executives in Atlanta together that we called the Georgia High Tech Alliance. And that's where I first met Monty Veazey, who's currently the chairman of the Georgia Alliance of Community Hospitals. And Monty had been the youngest legislator ever elected to the Georgia State Legislature at that time, and may still be, because he was just barely old enough to get elected when he first got elected. And he's from Tifton, Georgia. And we asked Monty to introduce us to the governor's office and to the head people at the legislature so we get to know them. And that was a time when Speaker Murphy was like a caricature out of a bad movie. Had on his fedora hat and cigar in his mouth. And most of the people in the state legislature are not from Atlanta. They're from country part of the state. And so they kind of played the part. But they were smart people. And we put together a presentation where we had the head of the budget, the head of the the people that had to sign off on all the laws that got passed, and the Speaker of the House at the state legislature together. And we gave them a presentation about how many high-tech jobs we had created last year and by year over the last few years, and how much tax we had paid, how much tax that generated as income for the state. And they were shocked. They had, first of all, high-tech jobs typically pay 30 or 40% higher than the state average, at least, sometimes more than that.
Right.
And so we were having a big impact on the state economy, and they had no idea we were even there. So that helped put technology business on the map. Then there was another event, I'm not sure exactly which year it was, sometime in the early 80s, where there was a group of economic development people got together down on Spring Street. There's a building there that's I can't think of the name of the building. It's a arts building or something like that.
Coda, maybe. Spring Street.
That name's not
Woodruff.
It's across from the Georgia Tech Hotel there somewhere. somewhere on that side of the street.
Midtown Union, Art Center Way, Sproul Center for the Arts, Spring Street Art Center, maybe.
It's an old building that had an auditorium in it where we met. And they wanted me to speak to that group, tell them about what we were doing with high-tech business. So they had 2 or 3 speakers ahead of me, and I realized that they didn't quite understand what was happening in the market. Here's a room full of people from the bank, the power company, and different economic development people from the state and from the several counties. And they're saying, well, how do we, they knew technology business was important, so how do we get more technology business in our area? So this was shortly after the governor had the Science and Technology Commission that I was on, and so they invited me to speak here. So after 2 or 3 speakers, I'm like, my speech doesn't really fit anymore. So I took the speech I'd written, folded it up, put it in my coat pocket, and got up in front of this group, and I started my presentation by saying, I hate to say it, but Georgia's reputation for high tech sucks.
And I bet it got their attention.
And it was like,
how dare you not just pretend that we're the greatest thing since sliced bread?
And I went ahead and explained that.
So you just took it off the cuff.
We've got technology here. We've got Georgia Tech. We've got technology companies here. People call us all the time thinking we're somewhere in California.
Right.
Okay. And explain that to them so they could understand reality. That's the thing I'm always telling people at the ATVL, that we're not criticizing you, but there's no improvement without negative feedback. And so negative feedback is required. It's part of control theory. You don't take corrective action without negative feedback. You just don't have to do it in a bad way, in an insulting and rude manner. You can do it politely and nicely and let people know that at that time, Georgia's reputation for technology sucked. And
Sig actually talked about this, didn't he?
Yeah, I brought it up that a lot of the businesses and VC, it's investing in software businesses that can help optimize non-technology businesses as opposed to actually building technology businesses here in Atlanta.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But that's their software approach. So the thing that happened was a good thing came out of that. That caused them to rethink a little bit. Turned out after a few weeks or a couple of months of study and thinking about it, they decided to put together a program to invite media, people from the various publications, the Byte magazines and the other computer and technology-based magazines, to come to Georgia during April when the flowers were in bloom, when the azaleas were blooming, so it'd be beautiful. Take them around to see some of the technology companies and then have a conference for them to attend to get their attention and present information that would change their attitude about Georgia. And it worked. It worked like a charm. That spring meeting eventually evolved into the meeting that TAG has today, and the
Technology Association of Georgia, TAG.
Yeah, TAG, and the group that I started merged with Beta and with Women in Technology, and then merged with TAG, and so all that stuff ended up rolling up into the TAG group, which is one of the largest associations in the country around technology business, and it's done very well for the Atlanta metro area and for Georgia.
Yeah, we've been involved in TAG to some degree. We were featured at one of their previous events as the top 40 innovative companies. But again, frankly speaking, that seems a lot more like a pay to play. And, again, there is an application process. But again, I feel like there's still to this day a lot of pretending here in Atlanta about how great the tech ecosystem is, which, again, it's a lot better than, I understood it to be when I was in school still, but it's not like
well, you got to set goals for what you want to be.
Right.
And I think it's done a lot of that. I think nowadays, a lot based on the ATDC and other activities around Georgia Tech, they not only work at Georgia Tech, but they reach out to other research universities across the state and have catalysts located in the campus to help startups get the resources and support they need. So that's there, and it's a good thing, but it's not everything.
Right.
At one time, there was a fund set up by the state legislature that's still in the state code, but it's dormant now, where the state would put some money into a seed capital fund that would invest in some companies, and they didn't think it through very well at the time.
Shocker.
So it basically put the money out and ended up getting closed down. There's interest in bringing that back. And this would be some of the function you see in South Carolina with the South Carolina Research Authority, where the launch program there makes a $25,000 investment in a startup, maybe come back and make a $100,000 investment in a startup, sometimes as a grant, sometimes as an investment. In South Carolina, they've been able to use that so that when the company goes full cycle and exit, they get a profit off of that investment. They've been able to take that and build up a fund to reinvest. Georgia just failed to get that cycle completed, but it should do it again. Now, that's separate from what the Georgia Research Alliance does, where they can fund research at a research university to benefit a business. But in that case, the school ends up owning the intellectual property and license it to the business. But the business still gets the benefit of the invention. So a couple different models, couple different focus, but opportunity for innovation in the state to bring back an old idea, change the way it operates to make it function properly, and make it have a perpetual capability of funding, of seed funding good ideas. The problem is you got to be careful not to let it become politicized.
Right.
And keep it independent and
kind of like how a lot of the systems through like Stanford or Harvard or Yale. Or
how do you do that? How do you keep it from becoming politicized or political? Because isn't that kind of a natural?
I think purpose, like with intention, you have to bring in people like Dennis that may have one view. You bring in a guy like John Yates that may have another view, and
you have to choose people to manage it that are willing to put aside their political interest and create a process of evaluating that's unbiased. And it can be done, but it takes some effort. It takes energy, It takes energy to reduce chaos.
Now, I think there's a lot more to talk about there, but in the interest of time, I do want to talk a bit more about your work that you're doing now, and anything outside of ATVL we can touch on. But would you mind giving an overview of ATVL, what the kind of genesis was for getting ATVL started?
Oh yeah, I'll be glad to. ATVL is the American Technology Venture Lab. Well, let me take just a quick minute and
context, please.
Give you context for how I got from Hayes Microcomputer Products where the newspaper in Sydney, Australia said that the day I was going to speak at a conference there said that we had created the on-ramp to the information superhighway. And
Wow!
Yeah.
What a statement!
I mean, literally, they put millions of people online that didn't have a way to get online before.
Well, we sold over 5 million modems.
Yeah.
Over the years, we grew the company to be doing legitimate business in 45 countries around the world. We had 1,500 employees. We reached an annual revenue of $250 million a year. And the last year we were in business, I think we sold about 4 million modems that year, roughly speaking. Because as the price came down, the volume went up, and everybody had to have one.
Right.
But after that...
Really quick, do you remember what that final year sales price was, roughly speaking?
Oh, we were shipping them to Best Buy for around $100.
Wow.
And pallets full. Some of them, but the thing we did there was not just the Hayes product. If you went into Best Buy and went down to the modem aisle, you would see the Hayes Ultra. If they were fully stocked at that moment, you'd see the Hayes Ultra on the shelf. You would see the Hayes Optima next to it. You would see the Hayes Acura next to it. And there might be a couple of speeds. There might be a Hayes Acura at 56K and a Hayes Acura at 38.8. And then you would see a Practical Peripherals. And there might be a version that plugs into your PC, or there might be the standalone connects to the serial port. Hayes compatible. You would then see the Cardinal modem, Hayes compatible, and you would see a white box, no brand. At that time, by say 1997, 98, those were all being made in the same factory. Those all came from Hayes. So we managed multiple brands through the same channel, and there would be there would be features and capability. As you went up price, there'd be features and capabilities that the lower price ones didn't have that were important to some people, but there was a step price all the way up and down the shelf.
What was Aris's? Are you familiar with Aris modems? I remember when I was working at Best Buy, that those were modems that I remember. Again, I was working at Best Buy 2013 to 2016, but
we had around 27 competitors when we told everybody we had received a patent, and we offered to license our patent to all those manufacturers. Funny thing, though, they didn't like the idea of taking a license. They formed a bunch of, almost all of them, with a few exceptions. IBM and AT&T didn't play this game, but the smaller competitors got together, around 21 or 2 of them, and formed a modem patent defense group. And they relied on a green light letter from one of their members, getting advice from somebody else's attorney, not their own, that they could proceed because the patent should be invalid. And so as we went out to offer them the license, they formed this patent defense group and started suing us from different states. So we ended up with 3 or 4 different lawsuits in different states over the same technology. So we countersued not only for patent infringement, but for joint boycott. And I think Elon Musk used the joint boycott with when all the advertisers pulled out of X or Twitter. I think that was a joint boycott, and they probably ranked up some significant damages if he could.
I think I recall some choice words for Bob Iger at that time as well. I don't know if you remember hearing that.
Right, but that's that's a Sherman antitrust violation.
Right. Same with get all the gas stations in a local area. Setting prices with one another.
That's a different aspect. A joint boycott is different than price setting.
Okay.
So, but it's a feature of the Sherman Antitrust Act that we used to file the countersuit, and we managed to get the lawsuit consolidated into the federal district court in San Francisco. And we kept working on, at first there were 20-some plaintiffs against us. We got it turned around where we were the plaintiff and they were the defendant because they were infringing our patent. And we settled with all but 3 before time for the court to start, the court date. And so we went to court with those 3, had several weeks of a patent trial, and then ended up, the patent was valid. The jury found the patent was valid and that the infringers had willfully infringed. They sat there on the stand and said, we had no choice. We had to copy what Hayes had in order for anybody to want to buy it. And we think Hayes was bad because they went out and got all the software companies to support their interface when they first brought out the smart modem.
Sounds like a great.
And I was like, that was a great marketing move.
Yeah, a great business development strategy. Sony. They had the same thing with a Blu-ray disc, right? And that was, of course, every Samsung, every manufacturer that wanted to make their own Blu-ray players or Blu-ray movies. Sony's getting licensing from each of those deals. But
right, and we took. We also would take extra modems to every trade show we went to because all of the software companies and everybody using modems with their product would forget to bring enough modems. So we would bring 50 extra modems to Comdex and pass them out all over the room.
Pass them out and you'll be receiving the invoice at the end of the show.
So everybody's using a Hayes modem for their demos.
That's all. So,
but yeah, that's cool. So you were asking about...
I was getting
ATVL,
to ATVL, and I know we're running short on time. There's plenty of. I would love to maybe do this again, a few months down the road, but
let me start at the beginning about ATVL. So when the Hayes Modem Company got wrapped up, I had an offer to come to New York for a while and work with a company that was doing fraud prevention on the internet. So I moved to New York for a while, and I was living in Manhattan doing the reverse commute to go out to White Plains, where they had an office that in a shared office building, actually in the Lawn Tennis Association building. And I was there for 9/11, and I was on the train leaving Manhattan when the conductor said, looks like there's a fire at the World Trade Center, and you could look off in the distance. I could still see well enough to see the smoke coming up from the first tower. Well, there's a longer story for that, but we'll save it. That turned out that after 9/11, we were not able to do the roadshow we were planning in October to raise money for that business. And that business ended up closing down. And I started working with startups and with executives to help executives confidentially coach them behind the scenes how to get their next promotion in a big company in downtown New York. And I would work with startup companies how to get their business ready to raise money, or worked on a lot of business plans, things of that nature. And after a while, I moved back to Georgia and did that in Georgia for a while. And then in 2013, we actually did 13 proposals to different companies to work with them, and nobody bought any of them. I said, okay, it's time to retire, and I went back. I moved on April of 2014. I moved back to South Carolina, where I was from originally, and I live a couple houses down from the house I grew up in. And while I was there, it only took about 3 or 4 months. I was so bored I couldn't stand it. And Aaron,
Sound familiar with you getting into music? But
These guys,
yeah,
your minds are just constantly, it's
yeah.
crazy.
So Aaron Oots, who was the director of the Greenhouse Business Incubator at USC Upstate at the time, found out I was back in Spartanburg. She had been from Spartanburg. She had taught the Entrepreneurial program at Georgia State while we were building the Hayes Modem company in Norcross. And she moved back to Spartanburg and was director of the Greenhouse Business Incubator. When she found out I was in town, she got me to come see her, and I ended up being a volunteer entrepreneur in residence for a year. Then I spent the next 4 years on the board of InfraGard in South Carolina and on the board of a cybersecurity company in Raleigh-Durham area. We managed to sell that company to a large company that was owned by a hedge fund, and very successful exit. And about that time, Michael Mino over in Greenville asked me to come over and talk to the next group, to a bunch of entrepreneurs that they had, I think, a monthly meeting where they had people come in and talk about their experience building companies. That led to me getting involved with the VMS mentoring program that Next licensed from MIT. And I did that for a year. And about the time I was wrapping that up, Bud Peterson, the former president of Georgia Tech, called me and told me that they were starting a new program at Scheller. And he introduced me to Peter Thompson, who was ramping up the Creative Destruction Lab program at the Scheller College of Business at Georgia Tech. And so I ended up becoming a mentor fellow with the Creative Destruction Lab Commerce Stream for 3 years. Met some very interesting ventures and had a great time working with some very outstanding mentors like Frank Blake and Sean Yeager and Patrick Taylor and Ross Campbell and a number of others. Great experience. Keep in touch with a few of them from time to time. When we found out in around April, end of April, middle of May in 2023, that the Commerce Stream had lost their sponsor, but that Tech was going to go forward with the Creative Destruction Lab with a new sponsor with the FinTech program, I said, okay, that's fine. Time for me to do something in Spartanburg. Several of my friends had been encouraging me to get involved with some kind of entrepreneurial activity in Spartanburg. So I took what I had learned from the Creative Destruction Lab, basically the method of objectives-based mentoring, and in June of 23 formed the American Technology Venture Lab with the intent of operating that type of program. And it turned out in July 1st of that year, Jeff Stenson started as the new dean of the College of Business and Economics at USC Upstate. Their facilities are perfect for our use. And we had a number of meetings to work out how we could use their facilities on Friday, the day they don't have classes, and implement our program. And the way the program works is we have a full-day session with ventures and mentors and a few staff people. And we have a couple of interns that support us to get things organized. And that day starts at 8 a.m. with continental breakfast. The actual meeting starts at 8:45. And at 5:30, we start a reception that ends at 7. So it's a full day with the group. In the morning, we start at 8:45 and introduce the mentors. And the rest of the day, we focus on the ventures. In the morning, we have 15-minute breakout sessions, 8 different times. And the mentors go from the large meeting to the individual breakout rooms, and the mentors stay in a room, and the ventures rotate from room to room. And that gives the ventures about 15 minutes to meet with the mentors, tell them about their startup. Now, during that time, previously, the ventures have been asked to define their 3 most important objectives for the next 8 or 9 weeks. That's used to focus the discussion around those objectives. And during that breakout period, one of the mentors has been tasked to be the presenter later on, and the other to be the reviewer later on of their objectives. So then we finish those breakout meetings, have lunch. Then after lunch, everyone, all the mentors and venture founders get together in the large group meeting room. It's basically a large classroom, tiered desk, and 2 large screens in the front, and really a nice setup for this type of activity. And we pass a microphone around when people need to talk to the room. And we start with the first of the ventures, and we go through all the ventures repeating the same pattern. The presenting mentor, first of all, we project their starting objectives on the screen in front of the room, and the presenting mentor discusses their objectives and comments whether they agree or whether they should be changed. The reviewing mentor then comments and recommends improvements, if any, and then we have a moderated discussion for about 10 minutes. And we go through all the ventures one by one until we've finished them. And usually there's between a dozen and 20, usually 15 or 16 would make up each session. And usually there's about 1.2 to 1.5 as many mentors there as there are ventures. A venture can send 1 to 3 founders, and they're expected to come to 4 sessions in sequence that are held 8 or 9 weeks apart. And after they complete 4 sessions and the following sprint, during the sprint, they receive 4 hours of mentoring from 1 to 3 mentors who volunteer to work with that venture. So after the objectives are presented, the ventures leave the room and go to see a presentation, some topic that we think they'll be interested in. And during that presentation, the mentors stay in the large room and do what we call the mentor deliberation. That's where we go through the ventures one by one again, and we ask who's interested to mentor this company for the next 8 or 9 weeks and volunteer 4 hours, at least 4 hours, to work with them to achieve their objectives.
And believe it or not, we never got dropped and made it through.
Well, if a venture doesn't get a mentor that's interested to work with them, they will be dropped. Typically, a venture will get 1 to 3 mentors, and we cut it off at 3 so we don't eat up all your time with mentors. And if there's more who want to, part of the mentor deliberation is to figure out which 3 will it be. And we do it without the venture founders in the room so the mentors can be candid about their working with the ventures. And usually a mentor will work with between 1 and 3 ventures, but if they don't find a venture they're interested in, there's no requirement that they have to. And the magic is the volunteerism. The mentor normally sees there's one of their objectives or more where I can help that business. The person or the business are interesting to me, and there potentially are introductions I can make that'll help them advance their business. The overall intent is to help the venture get ready to scale their company, which may include raising money, developing your go-to-market plan, basically getting ready to launch the product and scaling up to reach your potential. And that's kind of the way the program works. We've had 7 sessions. Sprint 7 is coming to a close. We just had the Sprint 7 graduating venture showcase last Friday, where we had 3 ventures that completed the program. All the venture founders that participate get a completion certificate for their office wall. And
I didn't even know that. That's a bonus coming my way.
That's waiting on me to finish getting the list over to James to get those out, but we'll get that out shortly. And then session 8 comes up on May the 9th, Friday this week. And Thursday night, we have an optional dinner the night before the session where the ventures and mentors who would like to, usually the ones that are in Spartanburg and the ones who come in the night before from further away. Usually it's about half of the group that will be there the next day. We typically run around 20 to 25 for the dinner and around 35 to 40 for the session in terms of total attendance. But that's how it works. It's great results. We've had wonderful feedback from a lot of the ventures. We do use the concept there's no improvement without negative feedback, but negative feedback doesn't have to be mean or ugly. It can be given in a constructive manner. We coach the mentors that they're not there to shoot fish in a barrel or to be a shark tank and take advantage of any of the ventures. But we only have one rule, and that's don't do anything that hurt a venture or their founders.
Do some of the the 2 different groups, the
Mentors
the
and
mentors,
mentors.
do some of the mentors wind up investing in the companies that they mentor, or the ideas?
There's several possibilities that have occurred, and we don't make any rules about this, except any relationships need to be done for the benefit of the venture. If the venture wants to hire someone who's been a mentor as a full-time employee or as a fractional executive, that's fine. If they want to get them to be a director on their board, that's fine. If the mentors are interested to invest in a venture, that happens occasionally.
Yeah.
ATVL itself does not make any investment in the venture and does not charge the venture anything. We are supported by donations that we
Go through sponsors and
solicit.
philanthropy.
We go out and meet people that we think have money and ask them for a donation. Yeah.
Dennis just shakes their pockets and all right, cop it up.
And says you better donate, or your modem's going to be, your phone's going to be.
I'll 6-2 on you.
No threat. It's all free.
Yeah.
But
That sounds like a really great program.
It is.
You've done this.
Yes.
You guys have done this.
Yeah,
we
and
put this together. Jacob is just graduated. Jacob was in the graduating showcase
on
last Friday.
Yep.
Oh, wow, okay.
And
So I actually shared the video with you. I know you didn't get a chance to watch it yet, but I really would encourage you to get a better understanding of where we stand, what we're working
and your
towards.
your mentor.
So, I mean,
we're
Dennis has been a mentor. A guy named Tommy Holt has probably, not to pick favorites, but Tommy has been a big help. Again, not just from trying to figure out how to help iVue grow as a business, but help me grow as an individual, help me grow as a leader. And I think that's just as, if not more important.
Absolutely.
I mean, especially I realize I am not the leader that I think I need to be to grow iVue into the company that I want it to be. Obviously, I think there's a growth path for me there, but I think there's a lot of people that I can bring in and kind of fill some of my weaknesses as well.
Well, see, one of the problems I have with a lot of the entrepreneurial service organizations is they say, if you're not from our county, we won't work with you. Or if you're not from our state, we don't want to work with you. Or if you're not from our region of our state. And we think of ourselves as a regional activity. We see sort of the inner concentration being between Clemson and Charlotte and Columbia and Asheville, where Spartanburg's kind of in the center of that. But we also see the larger region going out to Charleston, Savannah, Atlanta, Birmingham, Huntsville, Knoxville, Blacksburg, Virginia, and even Research Triangle, Raleigh-Durham area in North Carolina. So we've had participants. We have a couple of mentors that come down from New York and one that comes in from Kansas City. We've had several come in from the ATDC, the Atlanta area, and one that comes all the way from Noonan, Georgia. We've had ventures from the Atlanta area, from Birmingham, from Charleston. One of our mentors comes in from Knoxville. So it's a regional activity. It gives us strength as a region. And people say, well, you're in Spartanburg, why don't you just work with companies in Spartanburg? Well, for one, there's probably not enough startup companies in Spartanburg County to do what ATVL does. And we don't need a function like ATVL in Spartanburg and Greenville and Anderson and Clemson, and we just don't need one in every town up and down 85. So as a regional resource, we reach out to the other activities in the region, and we collaborate with incubators, accelerators. In Spartanburg, we work with the Power Up mentoring program. In Greenville, or in Greer, we work with the platform at Greer that does a boot camp, and a couple of their boot camp graduates have come into ATVL. We work with, we're trying to do more with Next in Greenville. They've been sort of siloed to a large degree to work with people in Greenville. We're hoping to break that down some. We develop relationships with the Clemson University Research Foundation and the research department at UNC Charlotte, and we're reaching out to other schools and other other entrepreneur programs. We visited Davidson's entrepreneurial program that's just outside of Charlotte at Davidson University. We've had discussions with Columbus State about how they could get involved, and we've just recently had Benedict College, some of their staff doing their entrepreneurial programs will probably be attending our session on Friday as a guest to see how it works. So we're very open and collaborative with the community for the ESO environment. As a matter of fact, there was an opportunity that presented itself recently that we said, okay, we can do something here. And that was that for several years, while Erin Oots was at 10 at the Top, she put together the Entrepreneurial Services Community quarterly meeting sponsored by 10 at the Top. And 10 at the Top is a group that was formed to get collaboration between the Chamber of Commerce and the economic development groups in the 10 counties of upstate South Carolina. So they called it the 10 counties at the top of the state. And last November, after Aaron had retired there for about a year, and last November, 10 at the Top decided to change their focus from supporting entrepreneurial meetings to focusing on urban development, and so they could start having a monthly meeting in the downtown area of all the different downtowns throughout the 10 counties. And that's a good thing for them to do because it's an important function. But it's some of us that were at that last meeting said, wait a minute, we need to meet the other entrepreneur service organizations to understand what they do so we can improve our services for the entrepreneurs and ventures that we work with, and we can share information about best practices and reduce duplication of effort and find ways to do a better job. So the last day of February, we had a meeting at the George, which is the George Dean Johnson Jr. College of Business and Economics in Spartanburg. And we had a lunch sponsored by Spartans First. And we had a program with several speakers introducing sharing what they do with their programs to the larger group. Turns out we're going to be planning another one of those around the end of May, and see if we can get it to take hold in the ESO community to where we could start doing it in different parts of the state or different parts of the 10 counties. We've gotten good support there from 10 at the Top, sending our invitation to their mailing list. We've gotten interest and potential support from SCRA, which is South Carolina Research Authority. And we've gotten good interest from people like Spartanburg Community College and a number of other ESOs where they may be academically based, community based, or corporate based innovation centers type of organization. So that's been really good. As a regional organization, we've been able to leverage our presence to serve that purpose for the bigger community, and hopefully that'll lead to better collaboration over time.
Really quick, I just want to give you a quick time check. It is 1:08, so I want to be respectful of your time. However, I do want to give you the opportunity to touch on one of those impacts. Spartans First, here to their augmented reality system. Can you talk about this, not just from like the larger initiative, and this is from an organization that's gone through ATV as well, but what the impact is for you, and if you can talk about how this is personally making a difference for you.
Well, I met Chris Webb several years ago, and David Furukawa, and they were working on a system to help visually impaired individuals learn information about their surroundings wherever they might be and help them navigate those surroundings. And it also turns out that same technology provides virtual signage capability that's useful for anyone, so that the information provided not only helps visually impaired, but provides useful information for everyone. They developed that product, and they were a participant in the American Technology Venture Lab program, and you know we've worked with them to mentor and coach along the way, and they've made a lot of progress. To back up a minute, Spartans First is an organization we founded in 2020 that really began as a response to the defund the police movement, where we said we want to let our...
Sounds like a great idea. What could go wrong with defunding the police? No, I'm sorry.
Really? Well, we wanted to let our law enforcement and first responders know we care about them. I've had a lot. My dad had two brothers that were policemen. My mother had a brother, half brother, that was the policeman in Packlet when they only had one policeman there.
And where was this? I'm sorry.
In Packlet, South Carolina.
Okay.
And my dad's father was a state constable in South Carolina. And several of my relatives now, one of my cousin's sons is in the FBI, and one of my other cousin's son is in the State Highway Patrol. And several of my friends, one of my friend's daughter just married the resource officer at a high school in Spartanburg County. So I've got friends and relatives heavily involved in law enforcement. A lot of friends that have been involved in law enforcement one way or the other, or in the fire department. My dad was a volunteer fire chief in the local fire department for years. We had a monitor in the house, and every time the monitor would run off, you'd see Dad driving his truck out of the driveway to go to the call to help fight a fire somewhere. And so we wanted to show that, educate the community that what they do is important to protect our prosperity. And we're good friends with Sheriff Wright. He's had some difficulties recently, but he's been a wonderful sheriff for Spartanburg County for a long time. And so we wanted to have a good relationship there. Over time, we've realized that some of the things we want to do not only support law enforcement and first responders, but support the benefit of the community. And that leads us to look at putting together meetings where we have presentations, sometimes about health issues, topics people are not aware of, health dangers or health opportunities, things like economic development, how science and technology are not our enemy, they're our friend if we are the masters of technology. If we're not the masters of technology, it can be used to dominate us. So we make that a point of our programs to
serve people,
share information in that direction. And so 2 years ago, we were approached by a group that had been talking with Chris Webb at Foresight Augmented Reality. And Chris took their technology and created a version of their technology called Here to There. And this group have put together a group of anonymous donors who want to make technology available that's difficult to break into the market. In the past, they've supported some different kinds of medical devices that had trouble getting accepted in the medical community, and they're now working with Foresight Augmented Reality and the Here to There system to help make that available. So they have donated beacons with 30 months of free service to Spartans First, so that we can take those beacons, install them in a venue, and that venue will get 30 months of free service on the Here to There system. We're rolling that out. If you download the Here to There app off the App Store, you can see a number of locations where the service is available. You can expect that number to jump. That number of locations is going to jump significantly over the next 2 or 3 months, where there'll be hundreds more locations. We're targeting certainly Spartanburg County, which is our home in Upstate, South Carolina. We're targeting the area around Columbia and Irmo, South Carolina, which is a suburb of Columbia. And we're targeting North Atlanta between Woodstock and Peachtree Corners as a start to add to what's already installed in Georgia. They've had the system in DeKalb County downtown in the city offices or the county offices for several years. It's also used in several transit systems so that talking to the beacon, the Far Vision app can let the user know if they're on the right bus, which stop they're approaching on the bus. And if they're at the bus stop, it lets them know what's the next bus that's coming so they get on the right bus if they can't see. But again, it provides the virtual signage. So even if you can see, you know this is the right bus, or you know what bus this is. Or you know when you know it's coming 5 minutes later. So it has advantages, and eventually, after those 30 months free service run out, we'll be able to sell a renewal to those venues, and part of that renewal will be contributed to the nonprofit so that we can continue doing more programs in all aspects of our interest and mission.
And if you wouldn't mind, can you talk a little bit about what this would mean to you as someone that has, a similar condition to David from Foresight, that you have lost your vision over some period of time?
Well, actually, it turns out David and I both have retinitis pigmentosa. And he went totally blind probably 10 years before I have. But over the last few years, I've lost almost all of my remaining vision.
And just to give viewers, can you see me holding up my hand or no?
No.
Okay.
I can tell there's a light in the ceiling. I can tell there's a light over there. I can tell I see shadows and light areas sometimes, but I can't see your face. I can't tell if you hold up.
Lucky you. No.
Right. But I did have vision. I did have useful vision up until just a few years ago. I mean, it's probably been about 10 years since I haven't been able to really use a computer screen. But fortunately, my iPhone came along, and with VoiceOver, I've been able to stay pretty active, being able to read things on the phone. And
you don't think Siri talks back to you too much?
No, it's gotten better. I've learned how to adapt. But it's, and I try to keep a good sense of humor about it. I'll tell people nice to see you when they know I can't see them.
I may or may not have made a similar kind of comment. One of our interns was heading to a funeral up in South Carolina, and I said, he was mentioning he wouldn't be able to make a meeting yesterday because of it. I was like, sounds like they're dying to see you, but yeah.
Cute.
Yeah,
real cute.
I'm super politically correct.
It can be done in an ugly manner, or it can be done
right.
in a joking manner. Yeah.
Right.
And so keeping a good sense of humor.
Don't take yourself seriously, but take your work seriously. I think that's, to me, what makes the most sense.
Well, and Kathy, my fiance, helps me a lot with navigating places and figuring out something on the phone or on the computer when I can't get it to work the way it's supposed to.
So is the date set?
No.
Is there a date set yet? No?
No, we're working on it. We're just going one step at a time.
Nice.
We got engaged right at the end of the year.
Congratulations.
And then we had to let all of the family, we both have a lot of baggage with children and family members, and we had to let everybody know. And we're working towards, figuring out a time that's going to be convenient.
So is Sue your dog, or is Sue Kathy's dog?
No, Sue's my dog that loves Kathy.
Yeah.
No, Sue's from the Guide Dog Foundation in Smithtown, New York.
Wow.
And
she's knowing that she's picking up her ears. Her ears have gone up because
she recognized me saying her name. So when I realized I was really going to lose the rest of my vision, well, part of my theory for moving back to Spartanburg was I knew I was going to lose my vision over time. I wanted to get into a smaller house that I could get comfortable with, and I'd know my way around and I know where stuff is. So up until recently, I've lived alone since I moved there, and I was able to, I can still make something to eat, cook something to eat, things of that nature. Who knows what kind of mess I make or what it looks like, but it's usually edible. But then I lived alone, and I could find my way around and do everything I needed to do in the house. So that theory worked as I was losing my vision, and then I realized I needed to go to the Commission for the Blind and see what kind of services they had that would help me cope with the fact I'm going blind. Well, it was interesting because in order to get a dog, you have to get mobility training with a cane. And in order to get mobility training with a cane, you have to go to a 2-week assessment in Columbia, South Carolina, where they will come pick you up on Monday morning, take you to their facility in Columbia. You stay there all week, and then Friday at lunchtime, after lunch, they take you back home. You do that for 2 weeks, where I told them, I said, I'm blind, I'm going blind, I want to get a dog, and I'm able to work because I can use my smartphone, and most of my work now is talking to people and reading documents, and I can do most of that with the tools I have. And so they sent me to the 2-week assessment, and at the end of it they said, yes, you're going blind. Yes, you are employable because of your tools you use. And yes, we can help you with the mobility training you requested. So my mobility trainer came pick me up twice a week for a couple hours, and we'd go somewhere around Spartanburg, and she taught me how to use the cane and how to find the button on the post to cross the street that has a light and stuff like that, which works sometimes. In other words, sometimes you can find it and sometimes it's harder to find. But that training then allowed me to apply to get a dog. And a friend of mine helped me put together the video that we needed. They wanted to video me walking with someone guiding me and me walking myself with my cane. And they had to get they had to get something from my eye doctor that I was blind, something from a medical doctor that I could walk around and do things, something from another doctor that I wasn't crazy, and stuff like that.
I got him to lie. I only had to slip him a Benjamin, but...
So we got all this stuff in, and they told me, well, we'll call you in 12 or 13 weeks for your interview, and then after that it'll be like maybe 12 or 15 weeks we'll have a dog for you. And what they do is they train a group of dogs all at one time, and then they have a class come in, match you up with your dog, and then teach you how not to mess up what they train the dog to do. Okay. And you spend 2 weeks there, and each trainer only works with 2 people, which I liked, and it was a very professional program. Well, they called me a couple of weeks after I sent my stuff in and said, we're ready to do your interview. I was like, okay, I thought you were going to do that in 10 or 12 weeks. They said, no, we're ready now, and didn't explain anymore. And during the interview, several times they asked, how long would it take you to get ready to come up to get your dog when we have a dog for you. I said, well, I can leave in about half an hour. I can pack my bag and be ready to leave. If I want to take a shower and pack, it'll probably take an hour and a half to get packed and leave. And they were like, are you sure? I was like, yeah, I used to travel all the time. So it turned out that there were 2 people ahead of me that could have gotten Sue.
Wow.
But they weren't able to come. And so they went down the list to me and did my interview early.
Early bird gets the worm.
And, you got to be, the first rule of business is show up, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the second rule of business is follow up. And so I showed up, and they introduced me to Sue, and she's been with me all the time.
That's awesome. Yeah, Sue's been at all the ATVL sessions, hit amongst the crowd.
Oh yeah, she's there all the time.
Man's best friend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Truly.
I personally think that as well. But I'm going to ask this, even though it's a personal subject. You know, anyone that has access to Wikipedia, they go read your personal life section. Are you familiar with that at all?
I haven't looked at it in years. I don't know what it says now.
So it states that you were subject to one of, if not the largest divorce settlements in the state of Georgia. And I know that's well outside of, business from, a business strategy perspective. And obviously it's worked out well for you with Kathy now, with Sue, with running ATVL, like from the outside looking in, great life. But a lot of people just wrap up like they hit success and then they're always going to be at like this level of success, whether it's wrapped up as wealth or whatever the case. What are your thoughts from having gone and seen the highs and lows, and how do you manage that from a personal aspect? I mean, I know I'm throwing kind of combining a lot here into one question, but one thing that stuck out to me from this like past election cycle, if you remember, Robert Kennedy Jr.'s running mate, Nicole Shanahan, she had married the one of the co-founders of Google in 2018. By then, Google's already, Google, right? A household name.
Right.
And she ended up leaving a couple years later. There was whatever the situation was, but ended up walking away with more than $1 billion from that marriage. How did you look at that? Did you think like how the government is getting their hands in marriage, and like was there prenups involved, and I guess wrapping that up, what can you actually share? What are you willing to share from making sure young entrepreneurs don't end up in that same situation, or is it just don't fret it and keep going? And
you don't even have a girlfriend yet.
Well, no, again, there is like I have purposely not put myself out on the market, but again, like there's trade-offs that you have to make getting a company off the ground, right? There is limited time in the day, and then limited money to put into the company, and I would much rather put my time and money into a company than dates or
a lot of way to spend a lot of money
then waste it on somebody you won't know in 5 years.
Yeah.
Well, everyone has to find their own way. It's hard to make general recommendations for how someone should live their life, except to find somebody that you're really compatible with. This is my 3rd time.
I heard that's the charm.
And I feel like this time I've got someone who's really compatible with me. I think she loves me for what I am, not for what she would like me to be. And I think that's a big difference. My first wife wanted me to run for governor.
Oh, wow.
And that was difficult. But then it turned out later on, after we were separated, she's supporting Stacey Abrams to run for governor. And back in the day, I supported Johnny Isaacson. So that tells a big story right there.
Now, would you say you agree with this? And again, maybe not generally speaking, but I think it is. If you don't know what you want out of life, whether that's business or a relationship with a significant other, figure that out and don't waste their time. If you know you want something, try to make sure that's in alignment with what they want. And of course, they could lie and tell you something differently, but would you generally agree with that? Or again,
well,
hard to say.
You should try to find somebody you really believe you can trust, and that's going to continue to be what they appear to be today, and not change significantly to be something different, and not expect you to change to be something different from what you are. And beyond that, it's hard to come up with an equation. I think it's difficult, puts a lot of strain on the marriage if you have different concepts about politics. If you have different, it's hard for a communist to live with a patriot.
Yeah. And especially when the communist thinks they're the patriot and they think the patriot's the communist or the fascist or...
Yeah, when they don't know what words mean. Right?
Yes. And we can go save that for off air or another episode, but are there any other initiatives that you're a part of? I know you do some work as like a fractional executive, if you will, and an advisor, mentor outside of ATVL.
Well, Genesis Tech Advisors and Investors is my solely owned LLC. And I have several people who work with me as subcontractors. And we work with a few different companies. There's one company called Bubo.ai, Bubo.ai, that's from the UK. And they have a data analytics and artificial intelligence system that helps wholesale distributors optimize their inventory, identify customers that will have a retention issue over the next 12 weeks, and do a few other things to help improve their profitability. We can do a free profit check for a wholesale distributor in a couple of weeks for no charge and let them know how much benefit the system will be just by uploading their data to a secure area in the web and running the analysis on their data. And we're happy to meet with people and set that up. I also work as a fractional executive with a number of companies, usually for strategic management and business development. In general, I meet with those companies about twice a month for an hour to an hour and a half. And if they have an issue that comes up, like they need to review a contract or need to figure out how to establish a relationship or something like that, we'll work on that project. If a project gets to be too big, going to be more than a few hours, then we set up a statement of work and handle it as a separate project. And that's worked pretty well, and complements what we do with ATVL. And so far it's been pretty productive. I currently work with about 8 companies. That's about what I can do at any one time.
Yeah, I think that also goes back to some of the investment conversation that we had earlier. It seems like some of the most successful examples of venture capital being deployed have been either with that venture capitalist investor diving into the business beyond writing a check, or just being very limited in the number of checks. Of course, there's something to be said about, it's a numbers game to some degree, but from what I've seen, it's the ones that are typically more focused in the types of companies that they're working with. And not just from a writing dollars or writing check perspective, but I think that holds true even more so probably to getting involved and trying to have a better understanding of their business versus just trying to, again, give general advice that applies to all of them.
Well, it's hard to come into a company on the spur of the moment and help them solve a problem.
Right.
If you've known them for a while, kept track of what's been happening with their business for the last 6 months, it's a lot easier to help them solve a problem because you know the environment. You know what they're doing, you know what they're trying to do.
What resources they have to work with, or yeah.
That's true too, and what their limitations are.
We're gonna capture some of the setup. I'll try to commentate it to the best of my ability. So, for those watching, we are going to wrap up the show with a demo that should work without a hitch, right? It's going to completely just work seamlessly.
We'll see.
And so this is Kevin and Alexi. They are both interns and team members working with us at iVue, predominantly within iVue Robotics, our hardware division. And so what we're going to see here, assuming it all works out correctly, is this gimbaled camera here on the table is going to mirror the movements of the headset. So I think we're going to have Jim either put on the headset or hold up the headset to his eyes, and we're going to see the camera move. I don't think we actually have it set up for you to get the video feed in this headset today.
So I'll just be seeing a blank screen?
Yes.
So I'm moving my head or my eyes?
It will be your head if you're holding the headset up to your face.
So just so you all know, I'll turn 90 degrees to the right and then come back center and go 90 degrees to the left.
I mean, if he's not going to see the feed, is there any point in putting the headset on, really?
You have to capture the motion somewhere.
And turn it right.
So I take it that's a no. If
I think there's another issue. When the Pixar moves, this should also move, which is something we had earlier, and now it's not happening.
I mean, it works if you plug it into the
would it be helpful if I load up Q ground control or mission planner?
Yeah, your expertise would probably be good here.
So for those that aren't aware, Q ground control is the Linux of drones. It's actually developed by the Linux Foundation.
And share that screen?
Yes, you can share my computer screen. So this is what we still use a lot of times, not just for setting up and configuring our drones, develop air, but we still use this software for flight missions in some cases as well, just as we're continuing to build out our own proprietary software.
86-step box?
Yes. You didn't buy any advertising with us.
Otherwise I can't see the
All right, do we want to hook this up to my computer, or do you have another script or something running on your computer?
I have no, do you have this application?
I do not have that application.
Okay. Yeah, in that case, I'm going to need it back after you're done with that.
So I'm going in here, and I'm just going to confirm that all of the parameters
stabilize flight mode
are set up for this camera. And for anyone familiar with doing demos, they always work out exactly as they're supposed to.
Yeah, especially for being a first prototype. I mean, it could be a lot worse.
When I was in advertising and we started to get into technology with the web for hotels and people in tourism to utilize a program in the web.
Pre-arm 3D accelerometer calibration needed. Pre-arm compass not calibrated. Pre-arm battery 1 unhealthy. Pre-arm FEDEC 4 of 4 ESCs are not running.
It's like Siri talking back.
What I was going to say is we never went in and did a live. We went in with a program that we knew exactly. We said, here's what it'll do, and so they were just seeing a program.
Here's a picture of how
it looks. If we had done it live, we would have had to do what y'all are doing, and clients didn't want to sit and as we figure out the technology.
Yeah, so let's see if I tilt down.
It actually makes them think it's not ready for prime time.
So yeah, we are able to send inputs to the camera. If you see, I just tilted it there and then recentered it. So there might be something else going wrong with the communication of the head tracking system. So might be a little too early to demo it in the way that I was hoping to be able to show you today, but we're getting close.
Yeah. Well, it is tilting now.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, so if I plug it back in, it should work. Assuming the Bluetooth connects.
Oh yeah, so that is tilting based off the flight controller,
Mm-hmm.
so not the headset. So yeah, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
unplug this and try it again on your computer. You know what? A somewhat working demo, the best kind of demo.
Think I'll let it.
And
The best kind of demo is to do the demo and record it, and then show the
pre-recorded
recording.
demo. Yeah.
That's what we would do. Yeah.
Yeah. That way you know it's not going to fail in the middle.
Oh, so it is looking like it's working very minutely, but as you can see, again, not based off the headset movements, but the same concept applies that we can make it move with the headset, just having some problems with how it's configured right now.
Once it connects to Bluetooth, it should work. So right now, if I go and inspect elements, I can see. If you guys want to see my screen, is that possible?
It is, but I think it's going to be more headache than what it's worth at this point. If there's anything else that you guys would like to talk to, feel free to do so. But I think that kind of gets the idea across of what we're working towards and where we stand with it now.
Okay. So the coding and all the software for this was made by Mentorship, who's not here with us right now, but
So it's all Mon's fault, is what we're saying, right? No.
I'm saying I don't know right now. I'm just trying to get the Bluetooth connected, and it's not showing up here.
Yeah, the Bluetooth's not showing up.
Yeah, a while ago I was able to get it connected, and that would probably fix our issues, but
I actually might be able to help set that up if we all have another just moment or two.
Yeah.
Alexi, if you make some room for me.
Mine
So,
said it was
okay,
probably a Mac
okay, we're in Chrome. Let me see if I can minimize this tab. And Pixhawk 6C. Connect to the drone. And then we are wanting to connect to, and it's not showing up here, is that
That's the Pixhawk. That would be the last one.
right? And then,
Yep.
but are we wanting to connect to the Pixhawk or this via Bluetooth?
This via Bluetooth and Pixhawk via the wire.
Okay. So,
Yeah. Well, not yet. If then that box starts moving, then you'll know that the Pixhawk orientation is being tracked.
and then Bluetooth is on, Bluetooth settings.
Now, this might be a dumb question, but is the headset on to receive
Yeah.
Bluetooth?
And there's actually like a plastic enclosure that we have adhered to the top of the headset as they're separate. But yes, that is on. I don't think we're gonna be able to get it connect. I'm not seeing it as an available Bluetooth device, so it's probably not set up in pairing mode is what I would have to guess.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure how to get those ESP32s in pairing mode off the top of my head.
Yeah, last time Mono connected to the ESP32, we went into the Bluetooth thing on here through Chrome, and then on there it was showing up as testing. That's what Mon's named the device. But yeah, not happening now. But yeah, I mean, I can speak to the hardware aspects of it. Everything like hardware-wise works. Like you go on the ESP32, you can get like the data logs coming from the gyroscope on it. So essentially how this works is that the ESP32 is like a microcontroller, like the brain of this device essentially, getting data from a gyroscope on top of it to figure out what orientation the headset is in, and then that sends it through Bluetooth to a computer, which runs some...
Should send it via Bluetooth too.
Should send it to a Bluetooth to a computer, which runs some scripts on it to figure out, to take the orientation and then send it to the drone to tell it how to tilt the camera based on how the user is looking. So...
And don't worry, much like the early days of the PC modems, this is not how we're going to expect the everyday person to use it. We are, just in the R&D phase. But I want to be...
We could arrange a mentoring session to help you prepare for demos.
Yes. That'll be an ongoing effort.
I've got three or four mentors that would love to work with alumni to improve their presentation.
I am more than happy to take that help because actually the first ever demo that we did for our Omnibot air drones that we originally started prototyping, actually dating back to 2019, March of 2019, we started like the first sketches, like the whiteboard drawings. And ordered all the components to basically just build out a model of what the product will look like, but not really designed to be functional. But me being myself, pushing Andres, our engineer at the time, really leading the charge on its development. Let's get everyone together for the 4th of July and make, a big spectacle out of it, right? And so we go to take it off. One of the 3D printed motor mounts snaps off, and, it was the beginning of my experience that demos don't always go in the way that you think they will, just because you want them to go well. But
I think I found the issue. Between the last time we did the Bluetooth and now, one of the power wires was snapped off.
So all the hardware is not good.
Yeah. So this is internally spitting out an error and not actually doing anything. So once that wire gets reconnected, we should be back in the state we were before. But yeah, again, it is a prototype. It's in a plastic box, not 3D printed or anything professional right now. But yeah, we're getting there.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for coming to attempt and showing this off in its full working glory. But better luck next time, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Jim, if you want to come back over, we'll go ahead and wrap this conversation up. And again, Dennis, just thank you for joining us today. And been very fortunate to be working with you throughout the last 4 ATVL sessions. And definitely any way that I can continue to help. As you know, more than most, not maybe in the best spot to be offering our help to some of the others, but everyone has a perspective that means something.
The thing I want you to do is to be very successful. My goal with ATVL is to end up with a bunch of very rich friends who've come through the program, been successful, and changed the world with their technology. So if you can change the world, make a lot of money, I'll be very happy.
Working on it.
Yeah.
And
shouldn't be too hard to do.
Yeah, easy enough. Yeah. But no, again, Dennis, unless there's anything else that you would like to promote or cover.
One final question.
Please.
Would you come back sometime in the future?
Oh, sure.
Love to have you back.
Without Jacob. Yeah, no.
Well, maybe and you'll be in a different position, a different place, and we can get comment and commentary as to more on what you're doing. And
absolutely.
I don't know.
Well, over the next 6 months or so, we should be seeing a big change in the deployment of the here to there service as Spartans First brings volunteers on board to talk to more venues to get them to let us put it in their venue. We can't just walk in and stick something up on the wall. We have to get their permission. And that takes a little bit of time, but we're bringing people on rapidly.
Great.
And then, of course, ATVL, we're continuing to crank along. We're finding some very interesting ventures coming from all different parts of the region. I was talking to a new venture in Charleston the other day that I hope they're going to make it on Friday. And another new venture that's over by Clemson. So it's, as we're getting known, people are finding out that they can, not people, but founders, but people that are founding science and technology-based ventures are finding out that there's a community here that is interested to help them be successful. And the nice thing is going to be when these companies grow up and make a lot of money, they can come back and help fund the program forward later on.
Do you know a Dr. Charles Watt in Clemson? He contributed to I think it's the Watt Center of Technology at Clemson University recently, like within the last 5 or so years.
I'm not familiar with that one. I know I've had a little bit of discussion with John Hannon at the Launchpad. I think it's the Boyd T. Smith Launchpad and the Sparrow Institute. But I'm not familiar with that particular one.
Okay.
And yeah, just wrapping it up, I know that you said it's hard to give general advice, and whether it's business oriented, relationship oriented, or both. Do you have any general advice for youth, whether they're looking to start a company or not, just to get the most out of their life?
Well, for youth,
Let's say about Alexi and Coven's age, just either finishing up high school or just finished up high school. And earlier, if you think it's too late to really start at that age.
well, I would tell your grandparents, if your grandchildren are not learning prompt engineering, they're getting left behind. Learn about AI. If coding was important 20 years ago, prompt engineering is important today, because that's the way we're going to interact with the computer and tell it what we want it to do.
And wasn't that really the holy grail of programming to begin with, that one of these days we'll just be able to talk to a computer like it's human and be able to produce the output that we want? I mean, we're getting closer.
It's interesting because artificial intelligence, it creates so much confusion among people because it's not just one thing. Machine learning can be implemented in small devices or in big data centers. And you can do such a range of functionality with machine learning, neural networks, and so forth. So basically using the AI that's going to be available, for $30 a month, you can get a subscription to ChatGPT or a similar amount with Grok on X. And you can learn how to make inquiries to get the kind of responses you need. If you just start throwing random questions, you may get random answers. But if you learn how to do the prompts in a way that makes sense to the AI engine, you'll get much more useful answers. And there's a science to that, and there's an art to that. High school students, I'd say learn your math, your science, your English, and your history. If you don't know history, you're going to see the mistakes repeated. If you know history, you might be able to do something about it to avoid the same mistakes. But math and science are going to be fundamental to most of the high-paying jobs in the future.
Jim, anything else you would like to add on?
No, just thank you, Dennis and Kathy, for being here with us. Yeah. We really appreciate it. This has been, for me, the most interesting podcast that we've done so far.
This is, again, not to pick favorites, but easily my favorite as well.
Yeah. We've had some really interesting, SIG was great. We had some interesting people in, and so it's great to have a guest and to have someone like Dennis, and this is just really spectacular.
It's not that bad.
Good job.
Being stuck with me.
All right.
Yep.
Till next time.
Till next time.
Thank you.
Right. If you don't mind, I have my hand out in front. Just shake your hand.
I'll go second. Thank you.
Thank you.